Hey, well, here we go. We're in this joint for our September Ask Mongo. Oh my good God, I'm getting gray hair, y'all. Either I'm getting wise or I'm getting old. You're gonna figure it out one way or the other. I appreciate everybody stopping by. Everybody who's gonna listen to this on replay, thank you very much. Let's not waste time. Let's get right into this. 305 Johnny, he's got 5 questions. One, what wrestlers do you think deserve a match with Natty? Nobody. Natty doesn't deserve a match with anybody. If she want to have a match with somebody, she can go have a match on Collision, or I will not be there to watch it. Number two, what are your thoughts on Fat Joe and Jadakiss podcast, and why our content creators aren't gatekeeping their lane? Um, I'm not really. I can't follow every podcast known to man. This one, I like Jadakiss, but Fat Joe is he's never been my thing. So I haven't really been following it. I've seen some clips. Fat Joe is seemingly on there just telling all the lies. He's just a serial prevaricator, and the reason why people don't content can't gatekeep is because you can't stop it. All these guys do and go and buy microphones and set up a camera, and that's it. And they perform basically. It literally takes no talent. If you've been in the business for a long time, you know a bunch of people, so you can get interviews. Um, you might have an interesting perspective, but I can't imagine that too many people are making a whole lot of money off of podcasting because there's so many podcasts. You know, it's like everybody has a podcast for God's sake. Three, are we seeing the end of superhero fatigue in Hollywood? Um, well, let's reframe that question because the end of superhero fatigue would means that superhero movies are doing better than ever. When in reality, superheroes are doing not good. Well, it was a fad. It went on longer than I thought it would, but I'm not surprised that superhero movies aren't doing and moving the units that they used to. There was too many of them. Just the one downfall of capitalism is that it becomes a copycat. And DC and Marvel kept spitting out more and more movies. They put less and less time into them. Marvel dug deeper into their bin of garbage characters. DC barely did that. I think Peacemaker is as far as in terms of going into the trick bag. Peacemaker might be a little far, but Suicide Squad was already popular because they put Harley in it. It was Batman, Superman, Arrow, Green Arrow is he was on TV for a while. Of course, the Flash is a popular character, but you saw it when they put what was that other one? The Heroes of Tomorrow or some garbage they put on the CW, and that show got booted. That show got canceled hard, bro. So yeah, there's a lot of people who are tired of these shows, um, and they're not watching them. So a lot of people tired of these shows, tired of these movies, they're not watching them, and I'm not surprised. His fourth question: after the incident involving Roger Jackson, what will be the outcome of the situation? Well, it it's been almost a week, hasn't it? It's been almost a week, or maybe almost 2 weeks. He's going to get arrested. Like it is inevitable for him to get arrested. But I'm thinking Roger Jackson's probably going to get a slap on the wrist. I think at the end of the investigation, they probably will find out whether those guys were drinking or not, and that might mitigate any kind of punishment Roger Jackson has to face. But this has been a pretty permanent blemish for Rampage because he's just been acting up every single day. Is a new Rampage tweet or a new Rampage video or him putting out more statements, and it's only making him look worse. You know, now he's talking about how his son has embarrassed him. Like this is ridiculous, man. And this kid, again, kid. But Raja has basically fell off the face of the earth after he got kicked off Kick. Nobody even knows if the guy is okay or not. Like he's gone radio silent, but his daddy won't shut the hell up. But I would imagine he's going to go to jail, but it's not going to be a long term or anything like that. Might be a couple of months, and he'll be out again. And I think it depends on the investigation and how it goes. Number 5, who would you pick to be your new SmackDown 6? Ooh, that's a good question. Well, it's hard to say who is on SmackDown because they're constantly moving people around. But I would go with Street Profits. That's 2. Carmelo Hayes. That's 3. Jacob Fatu. That's 4. Cody is 5. Drew McIntyre at 6. And I think those 6 could have really good matches and feuds and things together. Occasionally, you bring in a Sami Zayn. Occasionally you can work in a Jimmy Uso or somebody like that. And of course, there's going to need to be tag teams for the Street Profits. But I think those 6 guys, in terms of charisma and star power and all that, are probably your best bet. 609 Tails has one question: who is the bigger liar, Russo or Bischoff? Wow, this is a tough question because it's probably Bischoff, if we're being honest. Vince Russo is a damn liar. I mean, he is. The biggest thing he lied about was that he wasn't in any way biased against the luchadors and the Japanese guys, even though he said he said so on the radio, and he has said since that he don't really like luchadors and all these guys wearing masks and they don't speak English and all this, because everything about him is all about dialogue. But Bischoff, it feels like Bischoff is a bullshit artist. If it comes down to it, if both of them are talking about the same subject, I would probably choose Bischoff as being the guy I would listen to. So maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'll say Russo is a bigger liar. All right, Darren Miles has 5 questions. 1, Lawrence Fishburne as Ernie Ladd in a biopic. Do you think it would be good? Well, it would have been great 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Lawrence Fishburne is old as hell now. Lawrence Fishburne is actually a fantastic actor. He's one of my favorite actors, even going way back to Cornbread Earl and Me. But Lawrence Fishburne, he's got to be what, 70? He's an old man. He's a really old man now. 2, was Mark Henry right all along about the Roger Jackson situation? I think he saw something in terms of the alcohol influence that other people was not paying attention to, and he was right about that. I wouldn't say he was right all along, because I think he was projecting how he would feel into the situation, and he was also saying like, oh, they were bullying Raja, and all. Like, they weren't bullying that guy, man. There's no evidence that he was being bullied. So he was probably ahead of the curve on noting that these guys were drinking in the locker room, I would say. He's 64. That's still fucking old, man. I knew he was in that 70 ballpark. He's an old man. He's a really old man. 3, Wu-Tang or Bone Thugs? That's easy for me. I grew up on Bone. Wu-Tang is great, though. I like Wu-Tang. 4, do you think Method Man and Snoop Dogg first album was so good that it overshines their whole discography? I think it's true for Snoop Dogg, absolutely. I don't think Snoop Dogg could. I mean, Snoop Dogg basically created the West Coast version of Illmatic and kind of took his foot off the gas and decided he was chilling from that point forward. Now, his career took a strange trajectory because Snoop Dogg still has plenty of hits. But obviously after the first album, he ended up doing like that mediocre the mediocre follow-up, The Dog Father, which I hate that album very much. And then there was no third album on Death Row. I think he did the Murder Was the Case, the soundtrack, but then he ended up going to No Limit, and that was weird. Method Man, that first album, To Cal, it certainly was his best album, especially if you compare it to his second album, which was To Cal 2000 Judgment Day. I think To Cal Zero is comparable, but I definitely think that To Cal, the first one, does overshadow the rest of the work that Method Man has done. 305 Johnny says, what are your thoughts on Amanda Seales versus 20 conservatives debate on Jubilee? All right. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this. I was not impressed with anybody, really. It felt like it was a lot of the same stuff again and again. A lot of conservatives, they kind of note three things: fatherless homes, children out of wedlock, and drug dealing, hip hop, black culture, and they kind of run with those things in a circle. Meanwhile, the radicals. Now, she called herself a radical. She didn't want to call herself a liberal because she's basically a communist, right? But she's not a real communist because she's rich, by the way. But she was dressed like a Batman villain, which I thought was funny for Amanda Seales. But any talk about reparations is kind of foolish. The fact that she would even bring it up is foolish. The oversimplification of things like redlining, the belief in the mysterious systemic racism, and plus, I think it was interesting because one of the things that she said that I actually agreed with, and when she was talking to the 18-year-old Angolan kid, I think that's what his name was. He was talking about how stats don't lie. She's like, "Oh no, stats lie all the time." But the whole reason she believes in systemic racism is because of statistics, right? She looks at the statistics and then decides, oh, systemic racism is real. The only reason people believe in redlining and all that sort of stuff is because of statistics. People believed in driving while black. People believed in the police mass murdering black people. They all believed that stuff because of statistics, and these statistics were lies. They were lies again and again. So she's right in so much that statistics can be used to lie because black academics have been lying using statistics for 40 goddamn years. But she was wrong in that everything she mentioned was not real. These things are not real. Okay, so look, it's not that these things are not real. Let me back up. Let me back up just a little bit. It's that you give way too much credit to something like redlining. Redlining, it happened, but it didn't just happen to black people. That's the thing. It happened to everybody who lived in a certain neighborhood. It was neighborhoods that were redlined. And the people who lived in those neighborhoods were more likely to be very, very poor. And most of the time, those poor neighborhoods were multi-ethnic, meaning there were black and some kind of immigrant community. Okay? So she's definitely over simplifying what redlining is. There's actually a website from some university. I don't remember which one it was, but you can actually look up which parts of, let's say, your city was redlined, and again, and then also redlining was in like the 30s and 40s. Like this has nothing to do with today. Like one of the big problems that you have with leftists is that they believe in static history. That once something exists in history, then it exists perpetually. even if you get rid of it, like you destroy the law, you revoke the law, whatever, then it exists perpetually. So you'll have, and it's a fallacy. So one of the things that they'll have is uh, the black man has no rights because the Supreme Court said so. Despite the fact that that decision was overturned, despite the fact that there has been 2 civil rights amendments to the Constitution since then, a Voting Rights Act, a Civil Rights Act, all sorts of stuff that happened since then. They will ignore all of that because one Supreme Court made one decision damn near 200 years ago. Like, you can't think that way. Even if you thought redlining was bad for black communities, or you thought that Jim Crow was bad for black communities, these things don't exist anymore. So they're not good arguments. Wealth is gained and lost sometimes within a generation or two. So if you've been here, and this is not to go into the Tariq Nasheeds and all that kind of stuff, but if you've been here 30 years, right? And Amanda Seals has been famous. She's 44. She's been famous since she was like 9 or 10 years old, right? So she's been in this country long enough to have seen entire industries sprout up out of nowhere. There was no, I think Amazon was created in what, 99, 2000, Facebook in like 2003 or something like that. Like, there's been, look at Twitter and Instagram, all these things that have popped up within her lifetime, and she's not old. She's 3 years older than me. Wealth is not static. The argument that black people are set back by these ridiculous beliefs, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You have to make better arguments than that. But I don't think that black conservatives do a really good job, because they all basically just parrot Larry Elder and Thomas Sowell, and they don't really. There's not a lot of dynamic thinking to what they say. Because when somebody mentions redlining, like, okay, redlining was done for even before the 60s. One of the issues you have with black people is they keep trying to fix the past. That's a huge problem with black America. They're obsessed with black history. They want to fix the past. They don't care about the future. So there's this obsession with things that happened in 1960 something, 1940 something, and they don't build shit for their kids today. Instead of looking back and saying, hey, our ancestors, whether you want to be ADOS or FBA, it doesn't matter what you want to call it. Those people were trying to build something for the kids of that time. They didn't have time or the resources to waste constantly relitigating the past, arguing about bits of history from, what is in our distant past, but in their recent past. Like, we talk about slavery more than they did. We harp on Jim Crow laws more than they did. They didn't even blame Jim Crow laws. I've read plenty of books from this era. I've read Jet and Ebony magazines from the 50s and 60s. They complained less than black people do today. They had a general sense of, it's unfair and it's kind of screwed up that this thing can happen, but they moved on. They tried to highlight the best of themselves, right? And that's the problem with liberals. Not only are they just flat out wrong, but they're constantly trying to relitigate the past, and that's what the reparations argument is all about. It's them trying to relitigate and fix past issues. You can't fix that stuff. You can't do surgery on the past. You can't fix it. It's over. It's done for. You could talk about how the Japanese got reparations. Irrelevant. For starters, when you talk about reparations, I'm only going to I talked about reparations on this channel a couple of times. I'm just going to be very succinct. The only way you can get reparations, and what reparations are, is if the government violates your rights. The Dred Scott decision, if I remember correctly, my God, I will actually look very bad if I'm not on point with this, but I'm kind of rambling. When they said that the black people do not have rights, there was a reason for that. They said that black people are not citizens of the United States. That was the reason why they said black people do not have rights. It wasn't because you're niggers, you don't have rights. It was because slaves are not citizens of the United States. Okay? In order for the government to violate your rights, you have to be a citizen of the United States. Now, of course, that has expanded quite a bit to now we're talking about the due process rights of illegal immigrants in 2025, but we're not talking about right now, right? If they and these rights were stripped away by that decision, the Supreme Court decision, because there were state courts like in Tennessee and in Georgia and Virginia where slaves did have rights. Okay? So the Supreme Court, when they made that decision, they stripped away slaves' rights. Slaves did have rights in these. They weren't citizens, but there were slave. I shouldn't say slave. There were courts that said that even though you were a slave, you were not chattel, meaning you were not like a cow or a wagon or something like that. You were still a human being. The Supreme Court got rid of all of that when they made their decision about black people not having any rights. And you could tell that black people had rights because he was able to sue. How can you sue if you don't have rights? Right? How do you have access to the legal system at all if you don't have any rights? The fact that plenty of slaves sued their masters and sued overseers and all kind of stuff in the past. This stuff is not talked about a lot, but it happened. So slaves did have rights, and those rights were stripped away. Okay. When you talk about reparations, you have to say that the government of the United States violated your rights in some way. Since slaves were not considered citizens, this was the 14th Amendment was all about, giving citizenship to the slaves. And because the United States government did not own any slaves, individuals in the United States government owned slaves, but the government itself did not own any slaves. You are not entitled to reparations. What is a reparation? It is the repairing of the government violating your rights. When you talk about the Japanese internment camps, they got reparations because they were citizens of the United States who had their rights stripped away from them when FDR had them thrown into internment camps. Their rights were violated. When an individual is arrested by the police, he is not told his rights, he's beat up by the police, and he sues and wins, that's reparations. For starters, you're not going to get reparations from any individual slave owner because, as I just mentioned, wealth is not static. Most people don't, and this is the crazy thing, because they know, they were outraged at the idea that slave owners got reparations. Well, guess what? The state violated their rights. They burned the cotton plantations and burned their homes to the ground. So for starters, they destroyed whatever financial incentive you thought you were going to get from slave owners. They destroyed them. Secondly, that was the case everywhere that slavery was ended. When it was ended in France, they got reparations too, because it was the government taking your property from you. It was the same thing in England. They paid slave owners to go away. It was different in France and in Britain because in the United States, the slave owners lived on the plantation. In Britain and in France, and I think the Dutch, the Spanish also, the slave owners did not live on the plantation. This is how Haiti was able to overthrow slavery. Most of those actual slave owners were not in Haiti at all. They were aristocrats who lived in France and owned property in Haiti or owned property in parts of Africa or whatever. That wasn't their major source of income. For slaveholders in the United States, however, it was. They lived on the property. Pretty much everything they owned was on that plantation, which included the slaves and the crops and all that sort of stuff. Once they destroyed that during Reconstruction, or shortly before Reconstruction, they destroyed all that stuff. They had to pay them back. Because according to the Union, they were still citizens of the United States. Now, you could have said, once you separated, you decided you wanted to be on your own, you would no longer have citizenship. Therefore, if we destroyed your hut, your house, or whatever, too bad. That's not what they did. They gave them their money for the slaves that they took and the property they destroyed. But all of this quote unquote wealth that people think that these slave owners had, a lot of that stuff was destroyed. And then a lot of these slave owners too, they were reliant on slaves. Some of them had slaves their whole life. Once they don't have slaves anymore, they have to go find jobs. So they weren't wealthy forever. A lot of that money was gone. So the entire argument literally falls apart when you say, look, you can't give reparations to people who are not citizens of the United States. You just can't do it. It doesn't make sense. Logically, it's consistent. You're not making any special rules. Everybody wants to talk about, oh, the Jews in Germany. Yeah, the Jews in Germany were citizens of Germany, and then the goddamn chancellor started gassing people. That's how it worked. The slave trade took place everywhere on earth. It was a normal part of operating in any country on the fucking planet. It was not something that was special to the United States. So I was less than enthused in listening to this. I was especially kind of disappointed in Anthony Bryan Logan, who was the first guy that popped up on that joint. I was not impressed. It sucked. Two, damn, I spent a lot of time on that one question. 305 Johnny, second question. Do you think Donald Trump should bring the National Guard to Michigan? I'm going to be controversial. I understand why Trump wants to do these things, wants to have the National Guard in Chicago and all these cities. He can't do that stuff. You simply can't. You don't have the authority. The states are sovereign. Even though the states suck, they are sovereign entities. That is my belief. I do not think that Donald Trump has any authority to stop crime in Chicago, for instance. The people of Chicago need to look at Brandon Johnson and Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, and say, these fucking guys want us to die. That's basically what they should say. Trump can't do anything about it. In Washington, D.C., that's a federal district. Trump has power there. He cannot start shipping soldiers to Chicago. All right. Now he did send them to like California and stuff like that when he sent like ICE, right? But they were sent to protect federal buildings and to enforce federal law. There is no federal laws in Chicago that are being violated by the fucking gangster disciples. All right. The vice lords are a street gang. They're under state law. And if the state wants to let them run free and do whatever they want, then the state has the right to do that, unfortunately. What he should do, however, is use his pulpit to show that Brandon Johnson and Pritzker don't give a fuck about the people of Chicago. That's how you fight against this stuff. You don't force feed the military to these people. You show that Brandon Johnson is inept. He's actually quite corrupt. But then again, that's nothing special for Chicago. You would think, I think they said 50 people was killed over the weekend, Labor Day weekend in Chicago. Even during the times of Al Capone, the government had enough sense to say we cannot allow mass murder in our streets. Only when Negroes start running the city is it okay to kill people in the dozens in these neighborhoods. Even when the mob was doing it, the state was trying to stop it. And I should tell you right there how much these people do not give a fuck about people in Chicago. The most dangerous fucking criminals that ever existed, even the police tried to stop them then. But that's them. That's their thing. 3, do you have white fatigue? I kind of do. I'm kind of tired of white conservatives crying and complaining. I'm certainly tired of white liberals. I've been tired of them for many, many years. So I guess so. Yeah. I am. I'm kind of over a lot of the really tired, dumb stuff that the white liberals are, especially are all about. 4, 305 Johnny's fourth question. What is your interpretation of gun violence in America and how do we solve them? Well, gun violence, I guess you could just say it's just violence. But the United States is a unique nation in that we have so many guns. The thing about it is not only do people have the God-given right to self-defense and to own weapons, we can punish people for the misuse of their weapons. And that's what we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on not letting people slide when they use guns in crimes, for instance. There should be a force multiplier for any time a guy uses a weapon in a crime. Even if he implies that he has a weapon. Because sometimes people do that too, they'll fake having a gun or something like that. So it's like a hate crime law. It needs to be like a plus crime law. Because basically they kind of do that. If you commit a crime with a gun, you get extra time. But I'm thinking like there's not a lot you can do because a lot of gun crime is basically gangs and personal beefs and stuff like that. That's a lot of gun crime right there. Now, when you talk about school shootings and shit like that, that's a completely different ball game. Because I know it sounds like school shootings happen all the time in the United States, but they're actually very rare. They happen far more here than they do anywhere else. But understand, those are also a new phenomenon. There was not a lot of school shootings in the 50s and the 60s or the 70s or any of that stuff. Those are I think they began in the 80s. I think the first school shooting was in the 80s. Now I'm talking about, I know there were school shootings like maybe a kid brought a gun to school, in the past, like in the 50s or something like that. But like the intentional, I'm going to shoot up innocent people, that's a fairly new thing and was popularized with Columbine, which means that there's some time there when we can actually look at it and say, what was different between the time before they started doing all this shit and them doing it now? And you see that a lot of these people have mental health problems. Almost all of them end up on some kind of medications. Um, they also will kind of blame people who are being bullied by, people in the school or something like that. There's always some excuse. But I think that now it's become a thing. It's going to be hard to stop because you don't want to take away the rights of people who have not done this stuff, but you do want to take into account that these things are happening way too often. And I'm not sure, most people say, well, we don't want guns in the school because now we don't want armed security guards, we don't want armed teachers, even though that probably would stop it, having armed security guards and armed teachers. Like back in the past, back I'm a pretty good buff when it comes to criminals in the past. And I like using that to inform today. When the most dangerous people on the planet Earth, they will also go after tough targets. They will rob armored cars, and those guys were almost always armed. they would rob banks, and the security guys who were robbing banks, those guys were almost always armed. They were armed. They would rob trains. Trains were almost always had armed people on it. So it's not like guns are that much of a deterrent. The surprise is like, okay, you got equal force. You're gonna come into a situation with a pistol. Well, this guy's gonna probably have a pistol too, but he don't know you're coming. So that's how they would get away with like armed robberies and shit. Like, you would plan all this, and then the guy is just sitting there eating cheese sandwiches, and all of a sudden you got a gun in his face. Whether he got a gun or not is irrelevant. So you don't want to turn schools into that kind of situation, but it might be the only way to harden the school to prevent gun violence is to put like armed guards around the schools. That might be the only way to do it. And now they're starting to attack churches. So like you want to have armed guards everywhere at this point. Because if they can't get you at church, they can't get you at school, they'll go to some kind of festival or something like that. They go to a concert and start shooting at people. So there's going to definitely need to be some serious thought put into this and how to fix these problems. It's not easy. It's not as easy as take away everybody's guns because nobody's going to allow that. That's ridiculous. All right. Is that it? Yeah. DeAndre Dukes has 3 questions. 1, who do you got for worst booker of 2025? Triple H or Tony Khan? I'm thinking Tony. Tony he's running smaller buildings than he ever has before. The ratings keep going down. At least Triple H is not running smaller buildings, and the attendance has been pretty good his entire run. We're talking about 3 years here of fairly strong attendance for Triple H. The TV ratings have not been that strong, but the attendance at the shows have been strong. For Tony Khan, the attendance at some shows have been strong, but his weekly shows are running in the equivalent of high school gyms. So I'll probably would go with Tony Khan, but they're neck and neck, if we're being honest. And actually, I'll probably go with the guy running New Japan. He might actually be worse than both of them because New Japan is like damn near dead at this point. Second question, trashiest reality show you've seen or heard about? Well, I've heard about a lot of bad reality TV shows. Probably the worst ones I've ever seen was like The Flavor of Love. And I used to actually watch that show. And in retrospect, it was extremely gross. In retrospect, it was very, very gross. And it was actually kind of exploitative of Flavor Flav. Because everybody knows like he's ugly and he was broke at the time. He didn't have a lot of money. But of course, that put a lot of money in his pocket. So now he got a better class of bitch after that. But that was probably one of the trashiest shows, you know. Yeah, Flavor of Love and everything from that came from that show. So all the spinoff shows that came off of that terrible show he had with Bridget Nielsen. Oh, ugh, that was bad, dog. I hate that show. VH1 ruined television. Now it's all garbage TV, all garbage. 3, what do you think of guys who've been in the wrestling for so long that's all they know? Well, a lot of those guys are ended up like they end up like Comics Explained, where they make a decent living off of YouTube just talking about wrestling. And I don't hate them. I don't hate those guys, man. It's unhealthy, but I'm not mad at them. Not mad at them at all. WG Phil has 5 questions. 1, why do weed smokers in wrestling always screw up their careers? Is there a case for weed being more detrimental than alcohol in the next few decades? No, alcohol is still worse than weed. A lot of people who smoke weed just they believe they're thinking deep and all this sort of stuff. and maybe they are, but a lot of them are screw ups anyway. I tend to believe that drugs, with the exception of very hard drugs like heroin and cocaine, I don't really think, and alcohol. Alcohol is a very bad drug too. But I don't think weed changes your personality. It might give you schizophrenia, but I don't think it changes your personality. I think it just makes you, more of what you are. Well, I think alcohol, heroin, those cocaine, those things change your personality. Crack, all that sort of stuff turns you into a completely different person. So I think people who smoke weed, they just become more of what they are. Um, and a lot of people are really into the weed thing as a way of self-medicating for other issues, ADHD, bipolar disorder. They've already got schizophrenia, um, all that other stuff. They got pain issues with pain, all that sort of stuff. So yes, I do think that I think weed just makes you more of what you are. People used to say that about alcohol, but I think alcohol does change people's personalities. 2, if you have to book Cena's final 3 months, do you think his final 8 appearances be matches, convince him to stay till Mania, or consider this run the first leg and sign him to a bigger contract to continue to Mania 43? Well, he's already said he's not going to wrestle after this year, so December is it. So I think you just make the last 8 appearances absolute bangers. I think that's the best way to salvage it. If you can't get him to show up, like if you can talk him into showing up at WrestleMania 42 and working a match there, that would obviously be the best option. And if Vince was there, he absolutely would have said John Cena working from WrestleMania to WrestleMania. That's the best option. To have WrestleMania, his John Cena and his final match is going to be in December of 2025. That's crazy. That's crazy. And I can't believe anybody in TKO agreed with that. That just goes to show how weird these people are and how little they care about the business. Vince would never let somebody retire in the middle of the goddamn. Like Lita can get away with that. She can retire in like random October or whatever. But Cena, no. No. Mm-mm. He even tried to talk Kurt Angle into staying back. He's like, "Oh, you want to wrestle John Cena? You got to stay another year." And Angle's like, "I can't do it. I'm falling apart." Oh, that was so unfortunate. But yeah, just make them bangers. You got 8 appearances. I would go 4 matches. 1 appearance to set up each match. I would go Brock. I would definitely squeeze AJ Styles in there. I probably would squeeze if it was possible to redo the Randy Orton and CM Punk matches, I would do those too. But I would sneak Drew McIntyre in there. I am interested in who his last opponent is going to be though, because they've used Punk and Orton already. So unless Edge is coming back, I don't know who is it going to be. Unless they go digging through the crates and find somebody, Now The Rock has gone and lost all that goddamn weight, so it's not going to be him. Batista did the same thing, so it ain't going to be him either. So I don't know who from his era is still around. The Miz, Cena versus The Miz one final time. The Miz is not a suitable final opponent. He certainly is not. 3, what are champions you are excited to win but hated the title run? Kofi and Cody being an example of mine. Oh, okay. I was excited about Braun Breaker's Intercontinental Championship run and it turned into shit. I was excited about Damian Priest. Again, he's one of those guys where each week I changed my opinion, but I was excited for Damian Priest and it didn't work out. I was excited about Chris Benoit and that didn't work out because I was a Benoit fan in WCW. And I heard he had become world champion in WWE. I was like, oh, that's cool, but that didn't work out. I was kind of disappointed in Mark Henry too. I was kind of disappointed in the Mark Henry run. I don't think that was very good. 4, with Sami likely becoming champion at WrestleMania, do you think it would just be a vehicle for Solo or Jacob to win the title? It would be nice if it was just a setup for somebody like Jacob to kill him and take it. But something tells me that Triple H is going to want to give more time to Sami, and he might end up just beating those kind of guys, which would piss me off to the umpteenth degree. But I don't hate Sami Zayn as much as everybody else. I know so many people hate him. I'm a storytelling guy. He serves a narrative purpose. He's not my choice, but he is on the same scale as like a Mick Foley. He's got some charm to him. He looks incredibly average, but he's got some charm to him. People want to see him succeed. You got to run with that, Mr. VXG, if Logan Paul only wrestled for AEW, how great would he be in the eyes of Meltzer? Would a Paul versus Ospreay match be the greatest match of all time? I don't know if it'll be the greatest match of all time, but he'll certainly get more credit from AEW fans. And after seeing that Paul Walter Hauser and all these guys running around giving him all this credit for going through glass and thumbtacks, I was just kind of like, man, it's very, very tribal. But I think the biggest issue is the AEW fans they personalize everything. Not liking a wrestler personally means that they cannot give him any credit for his in-ring talent, right? So he sucks is personal rather than a real indictment of his talent. So that becomes their major issue is, and you can look at it with somebody like Riho, right? They're very excited about Riho coming back. Well, why? Well, because they like Riho personally. If they like you, they like Hangman Page personally. So all of a sudden, he's one of the best wrestlers in the world. Yada yada yada. They never say anything positive about somebody they don't like personally, because to them it's one and the same. I can say I don't like somebody personally and still enjoy their matches. I can still say, there's people, Kenny Omega. I think he's kind of off-putting as an individual. CM Punk, I think he's very off-putting as an individual. It didn't stop me from enjoying their matches. But the AEW fans, they can't do that. They're looking for any little thing so they can say, you suck! And justify that they don't like you personally. I don't like Logan Paul personally. He's a scam artist. But he does a really good job of coming up with stuff in pro wrestling matches. I have criticized him for not fully understanding where to put things and how to put things together. That is true, and I'm not going to back off of that. But he's good at his job, right? He's good at what he's doing. Mr. VHG has another question. Says, do you think R&B and R&B groups will ever make a comeback? No. I'll say this. Everybody knows now why groups don't work. It's the same reason why you struggle to find hot bands. They got to split the money, and people don't want to do that anymore. It used to be bands and groups used to be a big part of how people got into the music business. You would cut your teeth as part of a group, But now that people realize like you got to split the money with all those people, you're not seeing a whole lot of groups. You're not seeing rap groups either. When's the last time a new rap group came out that was hot and people like? And you look in the '90s, you constantly had rap groups. Even if it was just two guys, even if it was just Outkast or Mobb Deep, but you had Bone, you had Wu Tang, you had Do or Die, you had Crucial Conflict, you had the 3-6 Mafia. All these guys started coming out. These were groups, 4, 5, 6 people. Wu Tang is 9. You know, and then over time you started seeing less and less of that. You probably see 2 or 3 guys in a group. Now you barely see two. Now you barely see 2 guys in a group. Most people don't even do groups anymore. Remember, people used to beg for a Black Hippie album, and they never did it. They were hot as fish grease as a group. Kendrick and Schoolboy Q and Ab-Soul and J Rock. Everybody enjoyed their posse cuts, so like when they did Rolling Stone and some of the other stuff that they did. Everybody's like, oh, there's got to be a Black Hippie album coming. Nope. No Black Hippie album ever materialized. That should tell you right there that something was up, that these groups don't work out. I think the last super group was Slaughterhouse. I stopped paying attention. So maybe there was somebody after Slaughterhouse that tried it, but most people, nah, they're not even trying it anymore. So I don't think that rap groups, which are easier, I don't think R&B groups are ever coming back. I think they're cooked. You know, especially groups with more than 2 people. Like that's a rarity. You know, that's a rarity. Somebody mentioned the Migos. Yeah, the Migos is 3 guys. So yeah, that was one of the last ones. Ray Shremmerd. And wasn't that only 2 kids? That was like 2 kids, right? Yeah, like that was a duo. But yeah. So fair enough. And that was, you said, the 2010s. I can't think of anything more recent than that. I could think of one Ray Shremmerd song. And I always thought they were like 12, you know. So I don't know. But yeah, Migos was pretty hot. And they not that I was a fan. I didn't listen to their whole album or anything like that. But I think that was it. And that was, over a decade ago. Griselda, wasn't Griselda mostly an underground group? You know, I guess technically they count, but I think they were mostly underground. I'm thinking of people breaking onto the scene, like a movement. You know, maybe I'm not articulating this correctly. I'm thinking like Wu Tang or Bone Thugs and Harmony. You know what I'm saying? Like you see a group and it's like 4, 5 dudes, and you're like, whoa, who are all these guys? You know, you don't see that stuff anymore. Like you do see 2, 3 people now. You know, now groups sometimes break up before the fucking guys are even on. Guys leave the group and go solo before the group even is fully developed. So, and I wouldn't be surprised if that same thing don't happen now. I think Beyonce separating herself from Destiny's Child was like the last time you was gonna see like an R&B group really like blow up, because they always poke out one person and try to turn that one person into a star. They do it every single goddamn time, every time, and it always causes problems. There's always a ton of jealousy and infighting and backbiting and all that shit. Or they have to split the money and they all end up broke. So they're not going to do it. G Unit technically wasn't even really a group, it was a label. And 50 Cent was just using the G Unit name to put on Lloyd Banks and Young Buck and Tony Yayo. So technically, no, 50 Cent was already on, for starters. That would be like saying Boys in the Hood, even though Jeezy was already on. You know, they basically use one guy to, who really doesn't have too much in the way of a relationship with the other guys in the group. They tried that with the Ghetto Boys, right? That's when they put Scarface in the Ghetto Boys. He wasn't really an original member of that group. They put him in that group. You know, Rap-A-Lot put him in the group because Big Mike quit, I think, or he went to jail or something, one or the other. But they replaced him with Scarface, and Scarface didn't really have a relationship with these guys. They just threw him in the fucking group. That's kind of what happened with Boys in the Hood with Jeezy. They just kind of threw him in the group. He wasn't like cool with these guys, you know. And it was the same thing with 50 Cent. He had no real relationship. He had a relationship with Tony Yayo because they grew up together. But these other two, they were just guys he signed to his label. The same thing with The Game. He barely even knew that fucking guy. Like, the kinds of stuff that I was thinking of is, I think Bone and Wu-Tang are like the best, because the core of Wu-Tang are cousins. You know, RZA, Jizza, and Old Dirty Bastard. That's the core of Wu-Tang. They met everybody else and formed this group. But everybody else seems to like be like a loose association of guys that the label were trying to get on. Dipset's the same thing. Cameron was already on before the rest of these guys showed up. You know, Cam knew Jimmy because they grew up together, but Cam had got on through Mace. And Joel Santana was a young guy that they didn't really put on until like 2002 or something like that, 2001. So it was basically a label, but Cam knew Jimmy at least before then, and Joel's was like their young boy. So that it's close because they did know each other before they all got in one super group, but Cam was already on. They didn't come in as a group, you know. Cameron, he was songwriting and a bunch of other shit in the 90s, like the 95, 96. So no, Dipset doesn't count. Yeah, but he was a young dude. 50 Cent was signed in like 99 or 2000 or something like that. I think Lloyd Banks started showing up on the mixtapes, but 50 had already been signed and dropped by Trackmasters and all that by then. You know, so he wasn't a star. You know, let's get it correct. Cameron at least had one hit before Dipset. It was Horse and Carriage. But 50, he had Ghetto Quran, but it's kind of like an underground hit. It wasn't like a hit record hit, you know. But it was basically a vehicle for him to put on his homies, Dipset and the G Unit. That's basically all that shit was. Those aren't really groups, you know, where every person in the group is treated like an equal. You know, that wasn't really the case. Like the core of Bone are brothers and cousins and stuff too. So, you know, it's that kind of thing that I'm thinking of. Most of the time, it's just the label throwing people together. All right, Mr. VSG says, how different would black culture be if gangster rap and Uncle Luke rap never existed? Without NWA, you still would have had Ice-T, so you still would have the same problem. Okay, but it's hard to say because it became such an integral part of rap, and the same thing with Two Live Crew. But Two Live Crew is an extension of what rap started out as, party music. You know, it's raunchy, it's dirty. At the end of the day, it's just party music. And Too Short was doing that shit before them. But you know, that's just kind of neither here nor there. But even if you were to say no booty music, and no gangster rap, then rap probably stays very, very local and never becomes the national thing. You got to realize, before regional sounds took over, you know, like before the West Coast gangster rap sound took over, it was all basically De La Soul and Q-Tip and Tribe Called Quest and that kind of shit, you know? And people, they like that, but it was very regional because a lot of that stuff was 5%er slang, all that rest of that shit, you know? But you wouldn't have gotten your Bones and your Wu Tangs and your Project Pats and all. You wouldn't have got none of that without gangster rap. So you got to take it. You got to take the L and accept it. That's part of. Yeah, it was Schoolie D was the first gangster rapper, but during the time of NWA, it was they still had Ice-T was coming out around the same time, and then you still had Too Short, who was selling tapes around, not at the same time as Eazy-E and all them. I think it was a little bit before, I mean, a little bit after. It wasn't much longer after, you know. And he was doing like, and they were kind of doing the they had grown up on raunchy comedy, and that's what they were doing on those records. So when Eazy-E was doing all the Easy Does It, We Want Easy, all that sort of stuff, he was doing his version of Richard Pryor, because that's what they grew up on. And if you knew that, then it made it easier to handle. But most people didn't know that that's what they were listening to back when they were kids. They were sampling stuff that Zap and all that kind of shit they were listening to, and they was also mimicking the comedians and stuff that they'd heard. This is where Biggie's very pause line, you look so good, a suck on your daddy's dick. That's a Richard Pryor joke. All these guys were doing it. They were all like in their 20s in like the 90s. So they were kids growing up in the 70s and 80s watching some tapes, but their parents probably had the records and all that kind of stuff. With Red Fox, and even though Red Fox is kind of old, but Red Fox and Richard Pryor and all the blue comedy, and they were just doing blue comedy and like rap. And some of it was just basically, they reading Donald Goins novels. We call it pimp culture. And that comes from a lot of the blaxploitation movies and stuff like that, Superfly and the Mac and shit. So this stuff was already going to exist because it existed prior to them. They basically just took and sampled pieces of it and brought it more mainstream. So it was always going to exist. Because Curtis Mayfield was calling people niggas on records. So it is what it is. The Generation Sharingan. He has 6 questions. 1, even though it doesn't look like we'll never get any WrestleManias outside of Las Vegas, or even heavily relied on New Orleans, New York, Florida, Texas, what are some cities and states that should get WrestleManias? That's a good question. That's a good question. Because pretty much any state with a football team probably could host WrestleMania. I want to see WrestleMania in some really interesting venues. Like, it was pitched that they should do a show at the Big House, which is the Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor. It holds 100,000 people. Ford Field also has 100,000 people. That's in Detroit, which is a major city, and Ann Arbor is in the suburbs. It's like 45 minutes away from Detroit. Like, I would like to see something like that, something completely different that you've never seen before. In terms of places that should probably host a WrestleMania, I would assume you mean places that have never held a WrestleMania. That's a good question. That's a tough one, because now we're talking about Europe, basically. But if you say states, United States, I can't think of a place that they haven't done that they shouldn't go back to. California is heavily populated, and so is Texas. Maybe the Superdome, but they went there for 30, and they went there recently too. I don't remember what year, because they stopped putting the numbers on the damn things. It wasn't that long ago. And they basically own fucking Florida. It would be nice to see them do one in Atlanta. I guess WrestleMania Atlanta. That would be fun. That's the biggest city I can think of that hasn't had a WrestleMania. They've had the Olympics and they haven't had WrestleMania. So Atlanta sounds like a good idea. What else? Yeah, I think Atlanta's probably like the number one on my list. Most of the other places will be like in the middle of the country, like Cleveland. Who the hell wants to go to WrestleMania in Cleveland? Who wants to go to WrestleMania in Indianapolis? We've already saw that the answer to that is nobody. Nobody's going to WrestleMania in Tulsa or fucking Nebraska or Idaho. It's not happening. So there's not a lot of places for you to go anyway that can hold a WrestleMania on maybe DC, but I don't know. Does DC have a big arena? I guess the Washington Redskins, the Commanders, their stadium, maybe in the shadow of the White House and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you might be able to get away with that. Yeah, you got the tri-state area with Maryland, Virginia, and what else? What else is there? Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and then people often travel from Philly to Baltimore. You got Baltimore's a big city. DC is a big city. Yeah, people can travel from Philly. People can travel from New York. Yeah, you could do that. Atlanta was WrestleMania 27. Really? Hmm. Hmm. That's a good one. Well, if maybe DC is the only one I could think of then. But DC's a crime-riddled fucking hellscape. I would never want to have WrestleMania there. That sucks. But they do have some colleges there and stuff like that. There's a college crowd they could tap into. It's definitely something you can look into. But DC crime is out of control, brother. It's bad. 2, what are your thoughts on black socialists / leftists and anti-capitalist YouTubers? For example, your FD signifiers, Lil Bills, Ole Oluranitis of the world, and how do you actually properly debate them? I'm not gonna lie, I haven't watched any. I've seen plenty of FD signifier. I've seen the thumbnails. I have not listened to too many of his videos. But black socialism pretty much is the same stuff I mentioned earlier. I've already talked about it. Like a lot of the issues is sometimes people get bogged down with definitions and all these sorts of things. Like when you say something like defund the police, on that's not what it really means, and all this sort of horse shit. But debating them, it would depend on the subject and your knowledge of the subject. But to be quite honest, when you deal with socialists, you're dealing with people who don't believe in basic economics, and most of them don't know how basic economics works. Some, but you don't need to have like a deep PhD in economics all the time. You know, you don't even need to argue statistics and all that kind of shit with people because you're dealing with people who have a grand narrative and how they explain the world. So that's basically how it is. When everybody has an ideology, which is basically how they see the world, and people will sometimes manipulate facts and reality, history, or whatever to keep their narrative whole. In order to fully understand black socialists, you have to read them and listen to them. I've read black socialists from the 50s and the 60s and all that kind of stuff because I know that the people today basically just parrot the same shit that they read in the 60s. The same shit Elaine Brown was talking about, the same shit Earl Afari Hutchinson was talking about, same shit they're talking about now. Because for some reason, Black America is stuck in 1969. All right. So Once you fully understand that, understand what their subjects are and how much they know about the subject, and then you could just figure out, like, pick apart their arguments like a Jenga board. Now, most of the time, these guys don't engage. Like, I've heard plenty of people say FD Signifier just blocks people. He doesn't really debate them. He just blocks them, which is typical of black socialists, especially since I heard he was a teacher of some kind, of professor or something like that. So he gets real haughty and he blocks people. I don't know that much. I haven't engaged with them. I'm just saying what I heard. And that seems to be right on par with dealing with black socialists, is they will block you. And that's it. There's really no debate to it. You know, they spit what they think are facts, which is based, like, you're not gonna get good fruit from a bad tree. And once your ideology, meaning the way you see the world, is crooked, everything's going to be crooked from that point forward. So everything that they learn through their ideology, which is why they get so wrong on redlining and slavery and reparations and Jim Crow and all that sort of stuff they get wrong. A lot of the historical stuff that they get wrong. This is when sometimes conservatives get stuff wrong, because they look at it through a conservative worldview. But the thing about socialists are they are almost always collectivists. By nature, they're race collectivists. If they're a black socialist, they're a race collectivist, which means the very idea that the race is, quote unquote, behind is proof that the system is corrupt and that the system needs to be changed. Now, what that means, nobody knows, because a lot of their ideas are fictional. They're utopian. You know, I said this before. I think I said it on Twitter. There is no reality in which a lot of the stuff that they talk about actually occurs. There is no black country that exists, has ever existed, that allows the level of crime and excuses that you see from black socialists. No African country will allow what's going on in Chicago to be happening. Now, in Nigeria, they can't really help it. It's kind of a third world country. You know, I know that there's like random Muslim attacks on Christians in the far-flung regions of Nigeria and stuff like that. But all this defund the police, all this abolish prisons, all this other goofy shit that they be talking, nobody does that. There's never been a communist country that has abolished prisons. It doesn't happen. It's bullshit. It doesn't work. And they're just saying shit most of the time because it sounds good. They cook shit up in a lab and then they come out here and start telling you, oh, you can live in a world without prisons. Or then if you challenge them on that, that's not what we really mean. What we mean is we need to, you know, engage with people's best selves and all that other horse shit. Okay. They don't say what they mean. They use words like magic spells. But the bottom line is you have to understand the ideology, read through the ideology. Thankfully, there's a lot of books that are written for black socialists, from black socialists. Now, it's sometimes you have to understand not every black socialist is a third worlder. A lot of the 1960s stuff that I've read from Stokely Carmichael and all those people, that's third world socialism. It's communism, third world communism. Because of the lineage stuff now, you're getting the Yvette Carnell kind of socialists who are socialism, but only for black Americans, right? You know, no immigrants, and you know, we don't care about Africa and all that kind of shit, right? Like that's kind of the one thing that is new now. Okay. So but back then it was all about the workers of the blacks of the world unite. So it was Kwame Nkrumah and all these guys being quoted in the Black Panther newspaper and all this shit. So a lot of those people, especially when they give them saying these crazy African names, they're basically third world communists stuck in the 1960s, and who cares? It's actually trickier dealing with people who are basically like common modern day socialists, who are still socialists, but they choose not to really participate like the Africans and the Caribbeans and stuff like that. It's the same shit, but they're a little bit more, I want to say, reasonable, because international communism is just a non-starter. It's stupid as fuck. It's a international communism is the dumbest fuck. It's literally the only kind of communism, by the way. So socialism will always fall if people have a choice. And this is the one thing that they don't understand. They'll always claim that, oh, Cuba or Latin America. I think this was the guy he ran this line on Patrick Bet David on Jubilee. Oh, it's the capitalists. They're always undercutting the communist countries. You know, this is why socialism doesn't work, because of because of the capitalists. It's like, look, if you need me to participate in it, it ain't gonna work. Right? If you can't build your own shit, and I put a blockade on you, you should be able to build your own shit. If I choose not to trade with you, which is free association, then your idea is not going to work. All right. Now, you should be able to get your materials from somewhere else. And that was the one fear that America had, is that the communist countries might actually start working together and actually be able to build something. Of course, none of them built anything. So we all ended up better off for it. Of course, they're just going to blame the United States for it. Oh, yeah, Cuba would have been great if you'd just let us build whatever we want. Yeah, sure. 3, if America actually did get rid of guns, would we really be just as bad or worse than the UK when it comes to knife play? Yeah, that's pretty much how it is. If you waved the magic wand and got rid of all of the guns, next thing you know, you're going to need permission to have a fork, because that's how it happened in the UK. You're going to need government permission to have a knife. You're going to have to get a license for that knife. You're going to have to get a serial number on that knife. And if that knife leaves your house, even if it's by accident, you put it in the trunk of your car because you got to go cut plywood or something later, you're going to end up in prison. This is why gun control doesn't work, because the problem are the people. The problem ain't the tools. The tools just make the job easier. The problem is the people. 4, would you agree that Black people in America have a serious identity problem, especially seen in internet circles like Kemet Hotep, Hebrew Israelites, Morris, Fez, hat wearing motherfuckers, Aboriginal / Dane Calloway sector, FBA ADOS? That's the biggest problem with Black people in the United States, and why I said earlier that they're constantly trying to litigate with the past. They don't. So many of these people do not have identities, and so they go searching for them. All right. This is where you get the 5 percenters in the Nation of Gods and Earths, the Moorish Science Temple, the Nation of Islam. You've already mentioned here the Hebrew Israelites, the Hoteps, because they don't have an identity. This is why they, in the 60s, this is why so many of them became Pan-Africans, because they wanted to be African. And that was a weird thing that I started paying attention to. It's like 30 years ago, and somebody mentioned this to like Yvette Carnell, like 30 years ago, you would have been like in 1992 or something like that. You'd have been on here with a flat top with one of those African medallions, because that's what it was from like the 1960s to like the 1990s. It was Pan-Africanism. Everybody was trying to find a way to connect with the motherland. And now they're trying to sever connections with the motherland. You know, it's because they have adopted American slave, descendant of slave, as their identity. And these people are creating these things, these flags, these sayings. They're creating whole fucking holidays and giving it to these people, and they're still feeling empty. They're adopting Islam. They still feel empty. It's hard to say, but I say, you are Americans. It's literally that simple. That's where I agree with like FBAs and all that kind of stuff. You're not Africans. Africans have, for starters, Africans are tribal and they have culture. So when Frank Zanu, who I've been listening to a lot of him, he's very challenging. He basically says Black Americans have no culture, which I don't entirely agree with. But in the way that he describes culture, you don't have an individual language. You don't have an individual way of dress. You don't have an individual religion. You speak English, you eat hot dogs, you celebrate Christmas, you're most likely to be Christians. Where is your culture? What do you mean by Black American culture? Now, Black Americans do have culture, but it's a shared culture with Southern whites. It's a unique thing. Our language comes from their language, the way that they spoke. This is why, Ebonics is very close to what the broken English of the poor Southern white. We ate what they ate. This is how we became Americans. Our religion is not there. Our religion is not the African religion, because the African religion depends on the fucking tribe. We don't dress like they dress. We don't dress like Africans. So it's a completely different tree. It's a seed from this tree that got thrown into a different yard. Okay? We might be Africans on the outside, but on the inside, we're Americans. And that's it. That's what it boils down to. I don't need to go further than that, because trying to litigate the past is not going to do me any good. And all of these things have been about trying to deal with the past. You're a sovereign citizen. This is the Morris Science Temple bullshit. You're a sovereign citizen. You're the Jews of the Bible and all this kind of war shit. You built the pyramids. You were here before Columbus. All this stuff. All that shit is pointless. Who cares? I don't believe none of it, but let's say it's true. Okay, so what? Now what? Like, okay, let's say I accept everything the Hoteps say about, Egypt being black and the blacks built the pyramids and all that. Okay, now what? In 2025, what does that mean? My kids still have to go to this dilapidated, fucked up ass school. They still have to read books written in English. Their constitution that they live under is written in English. Who gives a fuck about who wrote the hieroglyphs? Who gives a shit? I don't care. Like, that's why a lot of this stuff perpetuates, is because a lot of people are looking for a way out. They're looking for an identity. They want to see themselves in history. Well, I say that's fine. I don't need to go beyond too much, though, because that's when you start making up shit. You start mythologizing. Like, hey, I can tell you most Black Americans came from West Africa, the Ghana area of West Africa. And if you want to adopt that, fine. But like all these Negroes that's becoming Rastafarians, like, you're not Jamaican. Like, Haiti has its own culture because it was a mixture of French culture and African culture. When Britain colonized Jamaica, it was Africa and Britain. They combined and created something new. It was the Jamaicans. Same thing in Latin America. These things combined. The Spanish and the Africans combined to create something new. Same thing happened here, except for America. The United States was a bigger melting pot because it wasn't just Africans and Europeans, and it wasn't just like one European country. It was Africans, the British, the French, natives, the Indians, the Spanish. They all have been here. So you have Spanish colonies. Detroit, where I live, was a French colony. You have other German colonies and all this sort of stuff that happened in the United States. There's all kinds of shit here. That's what makes the United States different from England or France, or this has been, when they say it's a melting pot, that's what they mean. You destroy the diversity of the United States by saying it's just whites and Africans, whites and blacks, that's it. No, we have cities named after Indians. Pontiac, Michigan, the Pontiac Silverdome where WrestleMania 3 was, Pontiac was an Indian. You have states that are named after Indian words like Utah, Idaho. Those are not British words, you know. Then you have Los Angeles, San Diego, San Antonio. These are Spanish words. Like, this is what the United States is. And you can be just happy with that, because if you were born in an area that was at one point populated with, I know I'm not, originally from Detroit. Like, my grandmother came from like Alabama or Mississippi or something. Talking about mama's mama. I'm not sure about my daddy's mama. She died so long ago I didn't get to ask. But she came from Mississippi because my mama was born in Mississippi. So there's a culture from there that they brought up here. But then again, there were so many people who came from down there that came up here that they changed the culture of Detroit. But Detroit's always been a multi-ethnic city. Like I said, if you go back and you look at the redlining thing from the university, I wish I can remember what it was. I may put the link in the Discord. You can actually look and see what areas of Detroit were redlined. These were multi-ethnic parts of town. Detroit still has multi-ethnic parts. We have a Pole town, a Mexican town. We border Hamtramck, which is majority Arab. We have Dearborn, which borders Detroit, which is majority Arab. Then you have St. Clair Shores and Grosse Pointe Farms, and all these areas that are majority white. So you got ethnic whites in Pole Town, where the Polish community was for a long time. And then you have the general American whites in the suburbs. And New York is even more diverse. They have entire boroughs. They're like basically every fucking body in Brooklyn is Jamaican, or half Jamaican, or 3/4 Jamaican, or something like that. So these conversations get so muddy because people want to look at things black and white, and that's not the case. And plus, I just think that a lot of this stuff is wrapped up in religion too. And the general idea is Christianity is the white man's religion, even though Ethiopians had Christianity. Whatever. It is what it is. The fifth question from Degenerate Sharingan. He says, what should have been the main events of WrestleMania this past year? Well, Punk and Roman should have been the match. Why they put Seth Rollins in it, I don't know. But that should have been the main event. Cody and John Cena should have been the main event. But it should have been babyface John Cena, who beat Cody Rhodes clean and shook his hand and all that kind of stuff. And maybe you tease a Cody Rhodes heel turn. And you just tease it and milk it, and you don't actually do it. You have the crowd pull Cody back from the brink. Maybe even have Randy Orton whispering in his ear about, how he should turn on John Cena and how John Cena is garbage and all that kind of stuff. Like that would have been probably better. Especially since since Orton was Cena's first opponent. That'd have been, interesting. But I think they got it right. It's just to take Seth Rollins' ass out of there. 6, why are people racializing the Raja Jackson incident? Well, I think people are racializing every incident that occurs. Two people get into an argument. We have now started waiting to see if somebody's going to call somebody a racial slur, or depending on who you see, they give you the caption of black people chimping out, or white men being racist or whatever. That's just the nature of the beast, man. But there was nothing racial about the incident. But there are a lot of white people who are tired of seeing other white people getting beat up in the street. They're just kind of tired of seeing it. And I could appreciate that frustration. I really can. Because I know I get tired of it too. I get tired of seeing white people get beat up. I'm not even white. I'm tired of seeing that shit. It's just boring, bruh. Spice it up a little. I saw a video of like a bunch of white boys jumping a black kid. And I felt terrible for that kid because all of a sudden he gets beat up by these white kids. All of a sudden these white kids are the fucking Klan. I'm like, wait a second. But it's the same thing when you see black kids jumping up a white kid. They always think it's a gang or it's a knockout game or something like that. Instead of just fucking delinquents doing what they do, especially boys. You know? It might not even been picking on him because he was black. Him being black might have just been incidental. It might have been picking on him because he's a nerd or he's special needs or something like that, which is, though there are other reasons to pick on people. But, I think people are just, especially on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that, they racializing everything now. This is kind of the world that the media has told you to participate in. The M Studios. 2 questions. 1, do you think current day WWE is the most boring era in WWE history? Have there been other times when WWE was really boring for you? Well, yes, 99, 2000, I was kind of bored. That's why I left. 95, I was 11. So I liked a lot of stuff that's really kind of objectively bad today. But yes, this is very boring. And that's because even back then, there were antics. There were shit happening. Ridiculous things happening. Ridiculous gimmicks popping up like Jim Neidhart in trunks with a mask on. The Who gimmick, right? Like those ridiculous things that were popping off and happening. You had Jeff Jarrett doing music videos. Spend my days working hard on the go. Like this stuff's from 95. Like it's ridiculous. Him and the Road Dog. It's ridiculous. But it's fun and it's stuff that you're going to remember. And this is what I tell people all the time. Like, man, that's what's fun for me is, you build memories. And somebody showed a clip earlier of Batista and Simon Dean doing a skit in the ring, where Simon Dean was talking about how Batista's on his Simon system, because Simon Dean, aka Nova, was doing a gimmick that was similar to the Body Donnas, which is like the workout guy, and he's got the muscle milk and all this. And Batista like, I've never taken this muscle milk, so he drinks the muscle milk and he starts flexing and he starts feeling good, and then he beats the shit out of Simon Dean. That shit was great. Like, we don't get stuff like that now. They think, oh, Simon Dean versus Batista, this match needs to be serious. It needs to go 15 minutes or something. But why? Why does that need to happen at all? Why can't you showcase the characters? That's why people remember this stuff. And when they go back and they watch it, it jumps out at you because it individualizes the characters. Even if it's something that's cringe, like the Roman Reigns dog food segment. Cringe, of course, but you remembered it. Most people can't even remember what happened on Raw 3 weeks ago. That's the thing. Like, these episodes, these Raws, these pay-per-views are just coming and going. Nothing sticks. That's what makes it boring. The last time something people were really hype about something was John Cena's heel turn. And how did that go? Like, it's not just people want hype moments. People want things that they can remember and talk about with their friends online. That's what they want. And WWE don't really do that much anymore. His second question: since the Cena heel run is over, what do you think about his heel run as a whole? For me, I thought it was unnecessary and forced. Yeah, I definitely think it was unnecessary and forced. I think Triple H wanted something hype for WrestleMania, and an idea popped into his head, but then his managing of the idea was poor. And it didn't work. 3, He says, I remember one of your early videos on your channel. You talked about how giants shouldn't win mid-card titles, and that once they do, and after their initial push, they are never the same. Do you think Solo Sikoa is one of those wrestlers where winning the U.S. title after his initial main event push diminished him, e.g., Umaga winning the IC title in 2007 right after his feud with Cena? I don't think it helped. And I think it actually did a lot of damage to Jacob Fatu as well. You know, like it's absolutely a mistake. The thing is, once you build up somebody's mystique, it was the same thing with Mike Tyson. It was the same thing with Ronda Rousey. You build up mystique. You need to maintain it, right? That's why giants and people who are dominant shouldn't win mid-card belts. Because once you build up that mystique and then they lose, it's hard to get that back. Look what happened with Gunther. He lost the Intercontinental title to Sami Zayn. He ain't been right since. Like, he's been champion twice since then. But neither run had any impact. Had less impact than his Intercontinental Championship run. If he'd have won the Intercontinental title after being the world champion and was a dominant Intercontinental champion, you could say, oh, well, he's elevating that fucking belt. You know, like when Bradshaw became Intercontinental, or not Intercontinental, but the United States champion after he was the world champion. You know, there's just certain ways of doing things. And most of the time, putting a belt on a giant or a guy that you want to be a big star, and I mean big, like, you don't want him to be you want to use his size or whatever, his strength or whatever as part of his gimmick. You don't want those guys going out there eating a bunch of pins. You know, like this is what killing Bronson Reed. You shouldn't want this guy to go out there and eat a bunch of pins, because then people just see him as a pin eater. I don't know. But yeah, I agree with you. 4, do you think wrestlers today have terrible in-ring psychology or terrible in-ring storytelling skills? One thing I noticed within the past decade is when a wrestler like Rollins or Kevin Owens are heels, they tend to wrestle like they're baby faces, showing off with flashy moves and whatnot. That has been a huge problem with me. And that's one of my big problems with Kevin Owens, is that when you're a heel, we don't need you doing swanton bombs. Yes, I know you can do it. Okay, great. But I don't need to see that, you know? But it's even worse because now that the crowd just chants for and cheers whoever they want, then it doesn't matter. And I think that when you look at Jim Cornette's review of Clash in Paris, and he's talking about specifically the Logan Paul John Cena match, and he's like, Logan Paul's not getting any heat. He's right. People are just out there chanting, and they're not in the story. They're not in the moment. And on top of that, they didn't do anything in the match to get him some heat. They really just built the match around spots, because that's what Logan Paul can do. Making Logan Paul a completely complete performer, you take away all his athletic moves, or you do them in a way where he can do maximum damage. Like, it works for Logan Paul as a character because he's flashy, he's mouthy, he can be that guy, and he can do all these incredible acrobatic moves, but you should want him to get heat so that the babyface can fight back and you can set that story and tell that story. You can't do that today because the crowd would cheer for the babyface and the heel. So it's partially the performers forgetting that an important part of pro wrestling is the heat. It's probably the most important part, for God's fucking sake. And forgetting that they need to cheat. Everybody want to win the match clean with their finish. Last night, you had Mercedes Moné. She was working with Alex Windsor. She won the match clean. Why? Why did she win that match clean? You had Alex Windsor doing all of this stuff with the sharpshooters and everything. Why not have Mercedes yank Alex Windsor's hair while she was in the sharpshooter? Because she did do that. Alex lets the move go. Maybe Mercedes puts her in a small package or a schoolgirl roll up. She puts her feet on the ropes and wins the match that way. That makes Alex Windsor look good. And Mercedes gets heat because she cheated twice. But they keep forgetting, like, oh, she's just a better wrestler than Alex Windsor. Okay, well, you shit all over her because traditional wrestler storytelling is the babyface is always the better wrestler. The heel needs to cheat. Now, you can be more nuanced, clearly, because, as I've said before, if your heel is Kurt Angle, you're not going to logically go out there and tell the story that you're a better professional wrestler than Kurt Angle. It's ridiculous. Brock Lesnar is an NCAA champion. We're talking about that in terms of story. We got to use that. And he's a brick shithouse. We're not going to have you out wrestle him. But there's other things that we could do in making him look good as a heel, or making him look dastardly as a heel, because he might be able to out wrestle you, but now he's cocky about it. You know, this where you do what the old Shawn Michaels gimmicks, where you might have him slapping him across the head. I think he did that with Randy Orton. Kurt Angle did. You know, you do stuff like that. You do something to get some heat. Now their idea of heat is the beat down after the match. When really, we don't really need a beat down after the match. We don't need a beat down before the match, but we can use something before the match. But these guys are completely gone, bro. 5. Who are some wrestlers that you feel have been treated more as role player or gatekeeper than as a centerpiece of the show, past or present? For me, it's Seth Rollins. He was better off being a main event gatekeeper than a centerpiece of the show. I think Seth Rollins, he's an interesting case because I think they missed the boat with him. They've been trying him pretty regularly to make him the main event star. He ain't got that kind of material. He definitely is a role player, a gatekeeper. Bailey. Everybody knew I was going to say Bailey, right? Everybody knew I was going to say Bailey. I'm pretty sure if I could put some more thought into it, I could think of some more people. But maybe Gunter as well. I haven't seen him in a main event storyline that I felt was like legitimate yet. You know, even the thing with Goldberg, it felt thrown together. Did you know that the Goldberg Saturday Night's main event is not on Peacock? I looked. I was going to watch it again, and I couldn't find it. You know, I don't know what was up with that. The last one they put on there, I think, was one during the John Cena heel turn. I don't know, but yeah, Rollins is one. Bailey is another one. That's probably better off as a gatekeeper. Naomi, but I think she was going to go back to that role after her world title win anyway. She's going to go back to being a gatekeeper. Maybe I'll put some more thought into it, because like I like Drew McIntyre could be the star of the show, but he also be a good gatekeeper too. You know, I think people really sleep on Drew as a main event guy. I think the CM Punk feud really made him, even though he was world champion before that. They kind of reinvented Drew McIntyre with CM Punk, and then they dropped the ball. So now they got to start all over again. You know, and everybody's leaving to go to birthday parties and all that other shit. So who knows? 6. If you had to create a brand new pay-per-view name for WWE, what would it be called? Will this pay-per-view have a gimmick match or stipulation attached to it? I am in favor, now that they've taken them away, I'm in favor of themed events. Maybe not gimmicked events, but themed events. You don't need a Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, right? But maybe a themed event where, like, that's the one thing I loved about wrestling when I was little, man, is they used to, Vince McMahon would come up with all these crazy marketing schemes. So you'd watch Survivor Series 94 and they're wearing cowboy hats with the Texas theme and everything. That shit was fucking fun. The togas at WrestleMania 9, it was fun. I don't want to just see normal fucking people in suits. That shit's boring. You know? I'm not saying they have to wear costumes every week, but for certain events, yes, I want to see Raw Bowl sometimes, you know? Just because it looks different, it feels different. That's why I didn't hate the Donnybrook idea. It looked different. It felt different. I wish they would have did it a little bit more different, you know? But yes, I would definitely do a themed event. I don't know what kind of theme, but it would definitely be built around like a holiday or something. Like the fact that they haven't put together a Halloween Havoc type of show for WWE, they'll probably do it for NXT. And they've kind of gotten away from the Halloween theme of Halloween Havoc, but that's the kind of shit that most people became attached to wrestling about. So like an NXT Halloween Havoc kind of gimmick, I would love that. That would be great. Like a winter Christmas theme for like December or something like that would be fun. But nobody does these things anymore. A summer-based event. SummerSlam is supposed to be that event, right? Is it? Doesn't seem like it. Doesn't seem like it to me. You know, like the biggest party of the summer. Great American Bash. You know, the July pay-per-view was a themed event. It had a motif. That was good shit. You always know what month it was taking place in because it was a connection there. But they've gotten away from all that, and that's part of why all these events feel the same and look the same. That's part of why they don't feel the same look. Whatever. Next, 7. What is Sami Zayn's character at this point? I asked because for me, he has been very boring as a character. He was way more fun as a chicken shit, annoying heel back in 2020 and 2022. I agree with that second point. I liked him better when he was a heel. I liked him a lot better as a heel. I'm not sure what his character is because they've said he's not doing underdog Sami Zayn anymore. He's doing WrestleMania main eventer Sami Zayn. What does that mean? He was in a tag team in that match. So I'm trying to figure out what he means. That was a tag team match, brother. So I don't know, man. What the fuck? But he has a story. He doesn't really have a character. These two things are not the same thing. This was Triple H. A lot of characters went bye-bye. People have storylines, but they don't really have characters. What is Drew McIntyre's character? I don't know. What is Bronson Reed's character? I don't know. They came up with the tribal thief thing because he stole Roman Reigns' shoes and he got his ass kicked by Roman Reigns. So now what? They got Braun Breaker barking. So they're gonna do some kind of dog face gremlin, remix of his dad. Okay. What is Tiffany Stratton's character? What is Io Sky's character? What is Rhea Ripley's character? Like all of these people, like you ask, like what are their characters? What are their? Everybody has similar motivations, but the characters don't jump off the page anymore. And maybe the success of WWE right now is that people don't want characters. I mean, the character is Rhea Ripley. That's her character. What does that mean? She hasn't had a character in over a year. Ever since she started feuding with Liv Morgan, she got the whole mommy, manipulative, goth bitch kind of, manipulating Dominic Mysterio. That was a character that got over. But she doesn't do that anymore. Like, it used to be that characters went on for a long time. so you can really establish them. Like the Viper. You know, it was created in 2009. It was still going in 2012. It was still going on. You know, Randy Orton might snap and kick you in the fucking head. It was still going. The cult of personality CM Punk. Once it started, it was there until he left. He's still doing it now. But they've taken away all the characters because some characters were goofy. I mean, and that's true. Some people had goofy characters like Otis, right? There was a goofy gimmick. Oh yeah, he just go out there and shimmy and shake and all that kind of stuff, and people will laugh, and that was it. But like I said before, that's how people become attached to folks. You get attached to that character, that identity. R-Truth. That's why they went back to R-Truth. Some people are going to tell you it's racism. But people went back to what's familiar. The character that was established. That's what they wanted to see. That's what they wanted to keep. You keep trying to look at Rusev. Why do people chant Rusev Day at him? Because that was a character. That was a gimmick that everybody liked. I don't know, man. These people are ridiculous. Big Armada. Do you happen to know the origin of Go Away Heat? I know this commonly conflated with X-Pac after his run in DX, but I wanted to know if it existed before then. Well, you had some people like Eric Watts. He had Go Away Heat. But that was basically just silence. Like if you weren't over, most people they were quiet as church mice during your match, and nothing you did got over. The boo, the Showtime at the Apollo style booing of get the hell out of here. I want to throw crap at you. That started happening in the 90s. I think that stuff might have started in ECW too. But X-Pac was the first one that really people noticed that the heat is basically we don't want to see him. But it's hard to tell, because there was no such thing at the time. So if he's getting a ton of heat, people are like, oh, well, they don't like him. Put him out there again, And then you might see negatives in ratings or something like that would affect the show. And you're like, oh, shit, he's got go away heat. But most people are now just saying, oh, that guy's got go away heat. I don't know. Because the crowds are so unpredictable that it's hard to tell if they hate somebody to the point where they don't want to see them, or they hate them and they kind of also like them, like Dominic Mysterio, where it's fun to boo him. So we're going to boo him because it's fun. And then you have the Karrion Kross, which is zero reaction for most of that run. And then out of nowhere, they're chanting for him. Then they chant for him one time after he left, and they haven't talked about him since. So there's no telling. There's no telling. He says, are there any wrestlers who got go away heat who you thought didn't deserve it, past or present? I can't think of any. That didn't deserve it, I can't think of any. I can't think of any right now. I'm pretty sure if I put some thought into it, I'll probably figure it out. Are there any conspiracy theories that you find funny or interesting, even if you don't believe them yourself? Yeah, chemtrails. Chemtrails is a funny one because most people don't really understand. They think that the government is poisoning the air or something like that. Like that's nothing but water vapor, man. It's not. That's not anything. When you see airplanes above with the streaks and everything, they're dropping water on it. They're terrorizing us. Like, what are you talking about, man? Like, if you got poison air, it's probably because you have like a plant or something near your house or in the same general area that's poisoning the air, which can happen. But the idea that the government is just randomly sending airplanes around your neighborhood to drop shit from the sky is kind of crazy. Because if they poison the air, they have to breathe the air. Why would you poison the air? You know, like that. You have a city council, you have mayors, and everybody. Like those people just go okay with the air being poisoned. They live in the city. Well, most of them do, or they live in the same general area. They're not going to want the ground poisoned or the air poisoned. Probably not. Now, fluoridating the water, that's something else. But there are some really interesting conspiracy theories surrounding like the death of Malcolm X, because the guys who got busted killing Malcolm X went to prison. And then the conspiracy was actually started by Malcolm X's family because they believed it was the government. And then those guys just go like, yeah, it was the government. And then they got out and was like, oh yeah, we're going to sue because the government did it, not us. Like these guys are members of the Nation of Islam and everybody knew it. You know, like what's happening here? But that was an interesting one. I remember reading about those for a while. I really don't get too much into, but everybody has a conspiracy theory that they like. The moon landing being fake is another interesting one. That one's just fun. Ultimately, I don't think it matters that much whether the moon landing was real or not. Um, it's another one of those things that what can you do about it? And what is to be gained about faking the moon landing? Because like the Russians also went to the moon, so did they fake theirs too? Are all of the satellites we send into space fake? When we contaminated space with all of our machines, because we did contaminate like Venus by sending stuff to take pictures of the surface. Was that fake? Was that not really Venus? When we send stuff to Mars and we can see the grounds of Mars, is that fake? Is that not really there? Because it's entirely possible that all that stuff could be fake. So there's interesting things to consider. Mr. VXG says if AEW with their all-time great roster existed in the late 90s, early 2000s, how much hate would wrestlers like Rock, Austin, Flair, etc. get and the NWO get from the modern IWC? Well, not much, because those guys had their version of that. They had their version of those guys at the time, and nobody gave a shit. Like there was always work raiders. These work rate guys, they already existed. Nobody gave a damn. You know, people wanted to see the stars, and they probably still be in Japan because that's really what happened. Is all these guys who do these long wrestling essays, they all watch Japanese wrestling. They don't talk about the WWF because they didn't watch it. They probably grew up watching it, but then they got all these tapes from all Japan, and that's probably where all those guys would be. Which is to nobody's surprise where all these guys came from anyway. All right, WG Phil has 4 more questions. What has caused the most damage to race relations in 2025? Carmelo Anthony, no, not that one, or Raja Jackson? I think the Carmelo Anthony thing has been pretty bad, mainly because a bunch of bullshit stories came out after that about Carmelo Anthony being attacked by both brothers, and that the brothers were bullies and they were racist and a bunch of other stuff. This Raja Jackson thing is it's a big deal, but I think people are trying to racialize it when it wasn't necessary. But the Carmelo Anthony, it probably wasn't necessary to racialize this one either. But this one has done irreparable damage because he got so much money. I haven't seen anybody set up a GoFundMe for Roger Jackson yet. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. What I'm saying is I haven't seen anybody do that. But I did see that for Carmelo Anthony. And I saw a lot of bots. And a lot of these people are fake. They're trolling, giving money to these accounts, to like these Carmelo Anthony's. saying good, you killed a white man and all that kind of shit, because there's accelerationists out there. People who want the race war, who are trying to create division between blacks and whites and or feed on that division. As a little aside, since I spent so much time talking already, my theory, if I could have a conspiracy theory of my own, I believe that race communism, what we have in this country, which was imported into this country in the 1920s or 30s, all right, when blacks really started getting a foothold in the cities and stuff like that, and the communists came in and became part of the labor unions and the churches and all that sort of stuff. It was so effective because it was the only way to attack the United States. You know, the United States is a capitalist country. Everybody believes in the right to free enterprise. Communism didn't play into the class thing, and it still doesn't. Like, people still try that shit today with the class consciousness and the bourgeoisie and all that. It doesn't work. Every American recognizes that if somebody is wealthy, they probably earned it. And you could probably see how they earned it. We don't look at a Mark Cuban or these kind of guys and look at them with envy. See, it worked in Europe, parts of Europe, because they had royal families and all that, aristocrats and all that kind of shit, right? And you couldn't be part of that club. But in the United States, if you came up with a good idea, you could be a part of that group. You could be wealthy. The patents were open to anybody. Anybody could start a patent. Anybody could start a company. And you can go from being lower middle class to being rich. So it didn't work here. But race communism did work because it became, the blacks are always going to be on the bottom. And if you coalesce blacks as a group, then you will constantly have conflict, because the one thing that they cannot change is the fact that they're black. They can change their income level, but it doesn't change their race. And so you have rich blacks who feel like they've been put upon by society. So you have Oprah, Obama, Mark Lamont Hill, all these people who have millions and millions of dollars constantly talking about how they're put upon. They couldn't do that in Europe. There weren't no niggas in Europe. There was very, very few black people in Europe. So during the 60s and 70s, what you saw was divestment, decolonialize. We want the British out of Africa. We want the French and the Dutch out of Africa. Get out of Africa. Leave the Africans alone. So the 70s and 80s and parts of the 90s, you started seeing white people give the Africans back their countries. Now today, what you're seeing is the Africans are pouring into Europe, and they're starting the fucking race communism. They created the race communism in Europe. The Arabs and the Africans are pouring into Europe and clicking up by race, and they're starting the race communism in Europe. And it seems like they didn't have it. Like, I'm not saying there was no black people in England in the 60s or whatever. Clearly there was. But they didn't have enough of these people to have a race problem like they do now. Europe has a huge race problem now. And they did not have that 40 years ago. They had a colonialist, you're a colonizer, a settler, you're yada. And then they gave all these people their countries back. And then they started saying, our country is poor because of Europe, so let's go to Europe. Big problem. Race communism has been incredibly effective. Incredibly effective. I forgot how did I get on that subject? Oh yeah, the race question. Okay. Second, if WWE were to do a reboot with having wrestlers using past gimmicks like Austin Theory as Cena, Obafemi as Batista, John Cena as Vince, to keep the characters of the past alive, how would you book it and how long would it last? I think it would last 2 weeks, because as soon as you try to do something like that and you mess with somebody like a Hulk Hogan, we're going to have a new Hulk Hogan, that's going to be it. The moment you try to have a new Undertaker, that's it. You're cooked. We're going to try a new Randy Savage. Nope, that's not going to work. They tried that. Mark Merrill was supposed to be the new Randy Savage. Most people didn't notice that, but that's what that was all about. Mark Merrill had a girl. He had the robe with the glitter all over it. He would even spin around like Randy Savage. He was an Italian that was very dark-skinned to the point where I thought he was black like Randy Savage. Top rope finishing move like Randy Savage, except for unless it was an elbow drop, it was a shooting star press. They tried to make a new Randy Savage, and it didn't work. He had the charisma. He had a personality. The Wild Man, Savage. Did you get it? Wild Man, Savage. Did you? It didn't work. It'll never work. Nobody likes that. 3, Marvel hasn't finished the script for Doomsday. Oh boy. The movie has been in production since April. They are thinking of splitting Secret Wars into 2 films, and RDJ and Ryan Reynolds have gotten into it. How much of a cluster F this trilogy will be? You know, if they were smart, they'd just get rid of it. Just do Secret Wars and call it a day. All right, just call it a day. I don't think it's going to work anyway. These movies suck. Everybody knows they suck. So just call it a day. 4, who has effectively harmed WWE booking in current year? Triple H, The Rock, or Paul Heyman with Seth Rollins? Well, it's obviously Triple H. The Rock tried one thing. He came in, he poked his head in and tried one idea. And he was trying to basically continue the story that he started at WrestleMania last year. He wanted to do something with Cody, and that didn't work. Triple H is the one who decided that John Cena should turn heel. It was his idea, according to him. And he decided he was going to call Travis Scott. That was his idea, apparently. I'm going to call Travis Scott. With a move this big, you got to call in your heavy hitters. Got to call Travis Scott. Travis, you got an idea. Big idea. John Cena going to turn him heel. Get fucked. Dork. Dumbass. Top Dog. Got a couple of questions. Better Kid and Play movie, House Party or Sister Act? Sister Act was Whoopi Goldberg. So, House Party? House Party was. I haven't seen any of those movies in years. But it's those kinds of movies that I miss black people making. Good natured, fun, kind of teen-like movies. Like they were pretty good. Kid and Play were absolutely cringe, and they became more known for their movies than their music. Because I can't think of anybody who listened to Kid and Play, but I know everybody who watched their movies. 2, what's your thoughts on early Hogan's run from 1984 to 1987? Oh, it was tremendous. It was tremendous, especially the stuff with Orndorff. Oh, that was special. The Rock and Wrestling, that's one of my favorite times in the business. You know, especially now that the network was up and I got to go back and watch a lot of that old stuff, the Saturday Night's main events and the big event, stuff that I couldn't see before the network. Oh, what a magical time. 3, favorite years for WWE. Me, 1992, 1996, 7, 8, 2002, 2005, maybe 2007, maybe. I think that's it. I really don't care for any year after 2011, though, to hold you up. They're all kind of mid after 2011. 4, do you think the NWO and Hulk Hogan killed WCW? Absolutely not. The booking, the promotion, the management, those people killed WCW. 4, last question. Do you think the cool heel trend of the Attitude Era and Monday Night Wars played a part in how annoying wrestling fans are today? Absolutely. because now everybody wants to be part of the cool team, and nobody wants to be a babyface, and the babyfaces are seen as being lame unless they're constantly screaming and hollering and trying to get into really ridiculous things. Now everybody's got to try to be like a fake tough persona. The white meat baby face is pretty much dead. They don't really get involved with the white meat baby face anymore. It's very unfair. Very, very unfair, I gotta say. Because the white meat baby face, he was good. He was good for business. All right, that is all the questions in the queue. Let's go to the comment section and wrap this thing up. A lot left. Was last week's stream pre-recorded? Yes. I'm probably gonna start doing more pre-recorded streams. Hey, did you see David Otunga's video and him verifying and discussing the incident as well? I literally cannot watch any more content about that. I'm actually kind of tired of hearing about it. I said I wasn't going to milk the subject, and that's because I was tired of other people milking it. I'm like, I don't want to talk about this shit. I don't want to think about it that much. Mubarak, thank you very much, brother. Hopefully you enjoy it. Me being corrected. The Degenerate Sharingan says, to be fair, people only believe in statistics that they believe in. Fair enough. Fair enough. Virgo Rebel Penguin, hello. How are you doing? How you feeling? Degenerate Sharingan says that Amanda Seals was using some delineation talking points. Yeah, and then she started shitting on them after the fact. I saw that. Stone Mexican guy says, so the Haitian uprising is a lie or hyped up. It's true that the Haitians overthrew the colonists. That's true. But the real slave masters were far away in France. And the reason why they were able to do that is that the French, if you look at a map and look where Haiti is and look where France is, do you really think they're about to send all these people to fight these folks over half of an island? No, they weren't going to do that. It wasn't worth it. They didn't give a shit. But they did overthrow them. That part is true. But there's probably a little bit of gas on there. Probably a little bit of gas. Oh shit. I lost where I was on this comment section. I lost where I was on the comment section, bro. Let's see. Stone Mexican guy says, why is it that every recently elected black politician seems to be corrupt and using the veil of racism as a shield? Well, that's part of it is because that's why they're inept, which leads to them being corrupt. And race is easy to play with. It almost always happens in black cities, right? And there is a upswell in corrupt black politicians, from Fannie Willis. What was that chick in Baltimore? They had to throw her in prison. Like it keeps being the super mayor in New Orleans, not New Orleans, I'm sorry, Illinois. There is an upswing of these black conscious politicians who blackety black and I'm black, y'all, to the crowd, get the votes, and then they don't know how to run anything. So anytime you criticize them and it's, I'm black, y'all are black. This is a black city. This city is built by slaves and all this kind of shit. These people don't know how to run anything. They only know how to talk about race. And that's how they got the levers of power. But now they got the levers of power. They're not really interested in actually helping anybody. They're interested in enriching themselves. 90% of the time, that's a fake statistic. I'm just making it up. They only got in this position to enrich themselves. That was the whole purpose of them running in the first place. They didn't want to help black people. They wanted to enrich themselves. It's a hustle. Going into politics is a new hustle. Just like activism. is a hustle. People going into being an activist to take care of themselves. Look at the Black Lives Matter. They had all this stuff. They didn't build not one hospital. They didn't build one school. They didn't build shit for nobody. They went and bought mansions. They're corrupt because they're inept. It's all about using race to get something for them and what they want. Stone Mexican guy says they're trying to punish people for self-defense. Yes, in places like California and New York, you have no right to self-defense. And it's like England, because in England, you don't have a right to self-defense either. And in Canada, you're not about to have one either. I just saw, what was that, I don't know if he's a sheriff or a chancellor or somebody in Canada saying if your house is invaded, you should just comply. What? You should just comply if your house is invaded. That's what he told them. Just comply. And I just looked at like, you just kind of look at, I was looking for somebody to look at. I'm like, what the fuck? What? Or what are you talking about? And that's when you start having to talk about wanting to overthrow your government. You don't really have a choice at that point, man. Stone Missing guy said they attack churches but not mosques or synagogues. Weird. Yeah. Very strange, isn't it? Very strange. I'm not saying they should attack mosques and synagogues, but I've never seen a shooting at a mosque. I've never seen one. In no country. And it's almost always these pro-Palestine people too. Isn't that how that works out? Dynamite ratings 472,000. Stupid tennis. Oh, Booker of the Year, bro. Everybody loves those all-star 8-man tags. I heard. Rob Viper, he disgusts me. That run he went on this morning, or was it late last night? It was one or the other. When he went on a long string of tweets about how great these 8-man all-star tag matches are, that was fucking disgusting. I had never seen anything that cringe in a long time from a wrestling personality. It's fucking cringe. He was super cringe, bro. I don't know what this question is referring to. Black Say 97 said, damn, I didn't know you was doing a Q&A. I have a couple of questions. One, have you seen the movie The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke? Two, have you seen the John Wick movies? I did a review of the movie Mickey Rourke, The Wrestler, years ago. It should still be on the channel somewhere. Probably so far back. I'll put it in I will sort it into a playlist so that you can be able to find it. But yes, I did see that. I saw the first John Wick movie. I didn't know that he did 4 more, but I haven't seen those. WG Phil says the women of this generation are not worth giving love songs to. That's why they're not love songs anymore. They're all about songs about putting fingers in people's butts. WG Phil says also the argument of who's breaking out and becoming the star of the group. Yeah, they do that all the time. And sometimes they got a pick to be the star of the group. Ain't the person that is the one that does all the work anyway. ASAP Mob. Now that's a good one because they did come out of nowhere and it was a bunch of dudes together, and they were all interchangeable as far as I was concerned. But yeah, ASAP Mob is a good example. That was like the 2010s. Yeah. Same thing with Pro Era. Even though I kind of saw Joey Badass first, but they kind of all came on the scene at one time. Top Dog says, would you count Drake, Lil Wayne, and Nicki Minaj for Young Money in the late 2000s and early 2010s? Nope, because Lil Wayne was on since 1997. They were just his artists, so I wouldn't count that as a group. Diddy's Da Band. Well, yeah, that's true, because none of these motherfuckers knew each other, and they were all just thrown together as part of the label. So technically, yes, but they really didn't do anything. Like they did the TV show and they had like the one arbitrary album that never really went anywhere. Speaking of Kendrick, what do you guys think was his best song? For me, it's Poetic Justice. For me, it's Michael Jordan. I like Michael Jordan. Uh, The 2014 J. Cole was a different breed. Forest Hill Drive, The Chef's Kiss. It's a good album. I like that album. For Your Eyes Only, yeah. That was a good time for him. I think he started rapping around 2008. So he really started getting on in like 2011, 2012. By 2014, I think he was actually pretty good. But I actually think his mixtapes were better. Um, he was on something different with the mixtapes. He was kind of, but not so much these days though. I'm not really a big guy on J. Cole anymore. Do you, Sir John Legion says, do you think ESPN Disney will have any influence on the product, even though it's already PG? Could it always be worse than it is now under the House of the Mouse? I think they will have some input. Um, Definitely going to have some input on what they do on the show, and I believe, truly believe, that Netflix has input. That's why they have people who have shows on Netflix, like that Tony Heathcliff guy. Like he's got like a Netflix special coming up, and that explains why WWE's been in business with him so many times. He's in business with Netflix. Like, it came out of nowhere that this guy was all over WWE branded stuff, and now he's got like a Netflix special coming. I'm like, wait a second, come on. That's probably going to be their influence, though, is shoving their affiliates onto the show somehow. And Sports Center and all that kind of stuff, they're gonna influence WWE quite a bit. Sir John Lee says that Mark Merrow wore do rags back then. I actually didn't think Mark Merrow was that bad on the mic, but he didn't have Randy Savage charisma. Hell no. I think that the injuries put Mark Merrow in a bad spot. And then I think also Vince Russo taking over creative put him in a bad spot because Vince Russo made him a silly boxer when, people were getting used to his flashy offense. He had that knee injury, so now he can't do the wild thing anymore, or he's not doing it as much. And now he's cut his hair and he's a generic boxer. Oh, he's a Golden Gloves. It's for real. Well, they tried that and it didn't work. It didn't work. Phenomenal Ace. Oh, he's talking about Justice League. Well, what did he say? Ah, shit. I skipped forward. All right. Let's wrap this thing up. Phenomenal Ace says Calvin Coolidge was the only president at that time period until FDR, who wasn't a racist politician. FDR definitely was racist, though. FDR was a good old boy. Thoughts on Mike Tyson and Floyd Mayweather having an exhibition match in the spring of next year? Any fool who wants to give these people money. How many rounds is it? 3? Is it 3 rounds? Anything more than 3, and it's not worth talking about it because Mike Tyson not only 60, he's twice the size of Floyd Mayweather. All right, this is not a real fight, So just an exhibition of them showcasing their skills, it could be fun, but the fact that we got these kind of fights on the horizon and no real fights to care about is embarrassing. It's truly sad, I gotta say. But how many rounds would they agree to do? I want to see that answer before I wrap this thing up. Russo killed him when Sable powerbombed him. Yeah, they made him. They made her a star though. He said you're not good on any on my U.S. president history. FDR is shits. Whoop, what happened? What happened? Okay. Says I'm not sure how many rounds, but it should be an interesting guy exhibition match. I'm thinking it's probably gonna be 3. Um, I don't think Mike can go 12. I don't think he should even try 5 at the most. Floyd is in still relative good shape, but he's been bullshitting for years. He's done. He's retired anyway. So 2 retired boxers going to go in there and do some showcasing of skills. And basically Floyd's going to dance around old crippled ass Mike Tyson for 15 minutes or whatever. They're both probably going to get $100 million a piece, and that's it. But Mike wants to do more because, he had fun with the Jake Paul thing. He didn't get hurt too bad because Jake Paul can't punch, apparently. And that whole thing was a work anyway. So all these, exhibition bullshits. And plus, it's the only way Mike Tyson can get a fight is if they're exhibitions. I don't think physically he can even go anymore. So it is what it is. I think it's probably going to end up being like 5 rounds. Woodrow Wilson was basically a fucking Klansman. And guess what? His structure of society, like if you talk about systemic racism, he's like the closest person you could say was like systemically racist because he created the conception of public administration. The idea that there should be a scientific government. That's Woodrow Wilson. So all these institutions and shit comes from Woodrow Wilson. He was a esteemed racist. Andrew Jackson was also a very prominent racist. He was fun. He's a fun racist though. Like, he wanted to get rid of all those fucking Indians. He spent his whole life fighting Indians. So I'm the president now, so fuck these Indians. Shit. Heavyweight versus a welterweight. Nah, I'm good. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. It's a ridiculous thing. And a 60-year-old heavyweight at that. And he basically didn't he have like surgery or something on his hip or something like that? There was some reason why he had mobility issues in that fight with Jake Paul. No, who cares? I think people just like seeing Mike Tyson. That's what it boils down to. They just, they want to see Mike Tyson. They lucky they purchased Louisiana. They could have just fucking took it. They could have just took it. Like they took California and Arizona and New Mexico. They went and took them shits. That wasn't for racial reasons either. That was just manifest destiny, Get the fuck off our continent. And then they were lucky to leave Mexico with what they had. This is why when Trump say crazy shit about invading Mexico, they get so spooked. He just be talking shit though. He's not about to invade Canada or anything like that. He be saying wild stuff to scare people. It's Andrew Jackson. He was the president, and he did the not Chinese exclusion. This Trail of Tears. He kicked all the fucking Indians out of their land. They weren't citizens either, but they got reparations because the government signed a treaty with them, and they broke the treaty. So they was able to get away with getting reparations. That's how they got the conservations. So they technically are not citizens of the United States. They're technically sovereign. He said, "We know LBJ was one too. He got caught saying the N-word while creating the civil rights on tape." Yeah, I mean, the thing is, most of those people are smart enough to utilize niggers to their best ability without thinking too much. Like, I'm pretty sure of the modern day presidents, the only ones that probably have not been racist was JFK, um, Bill Clinton. I don't think Bill Clinton was a lot of things, but I don't think Bill Clinton was racist. I think most people were either neutral or just didn't give a shit about black people. I think Reagan didn't give a shit. I don't think he was a racist. I just think he didn't give a fuck. Bush, either Bush. I just don't think they give a fuck. You know, they're not sensitive to the black issue. They're kind of like, we have other issues, and the blacks have their own thing. We'll talk about anything other than the blacks. You know, like Nixon. I don't think Nixon was racist. I think he started the war on drugs because he doesn't like fucking drugs. And the same thing with Reagan. I don't think the war on drugs had anything to do with black people. I think it had to do with drugs. Again, the war on drugs is one of those things where it wasn't. It's one of those things where you talk to liberals about it, and it's a thing that is considered a black issue because it's considered an urban issue. But it was an issue because it affected everybody. It was affecting the automotive industry. It was affecting, you know, travel industry. It was affecting everything. Yes, drugs was a problem. It still is today. It's less of a problem than it was in the 70s and 80s when people was on heroin and they were shooting up heroin in the GM plants. It was a completely different ball game back then, you know. But I don't think those things were done to hurt black people. I think they happened to hurt black people because they were the ones selling fucking heroin. You know, they were the ones selling cocaine and crack. But I think the general idea is we don't want all of the disorder that comes with drug abuse. You know, the FDR, like LBJ, yeah, they're fucking racist. Who fuck cares? The media fucks with Trump like he a black dude though. That's funny because I don't think Trump is a racist either, and I think he has so much. He's like one of the he much like Bill Clinton. There's too many, especially before he became a politician. Too many people who have seen pictures of Trump hanging out with like Jesse Jackson and all these sorts of people and everything. Him hanging out with rappers and all this sort of shit, like all that stuff before he became president. And then all of a sudden they're like, he's racist because MSNBC said so. Get the fuck out of here, dog. He didn't become racist until he became a Republican. Then all of a sudden he became a racist. Stop it. Stop it. You cannot like him. That's fine, but don't gotta lie. You shouldn't have to lie about people if you don't like them. Who cares? Same thing with Bush. I don't think Bush just cared. I just don't think he cared about black people and black issues. You know, I don't think he was actively out trying to hurt anybody though. And that's different. To me, that's what matters. I don't care if you're not on my side as long as you're not against me. That's the problem. It's a problem when people are actively trying to fuck with your life. That's a problem. You know, them saying like I don't want to hear all your whining and complaining ain't really a problem for me. You know, I don't care about that shit because I don't care about things that other people care about. So I can understand you being in a position of power and you got all these other issues, and these people are over here jabbering on about stuff you don't care about, stuff you don't want to do anything about. You know, or you don't see the issue, you don't see the problem. And for a long time, that's kind of how segregation or something was. It's like people are kind of like, "What's the issue?" You know, you over here, done and done. You know, and then somebody showed up one day and was like, "Hey, segregation, we don't like that," and they was like, "What? Are you sure?" But there's people who like it, and then that became a huge problem. What are my thoughts on Teddy Roosevelt? Uh, I probably need to look more into him. Favorite racist president: Jefferson, Jackson, Wilson, FDR. Jefferson, absolutely. Thomas Jefferson is legitimate. Like top 10 white people, but he was absolutely a racist. And he's one of those man of his time kind of gimmicks. The thing about a lot of those people from that era is that they saw the world as a not necessarily racist, but it was paternal. You know, the blacks were not the same as they were. You know, it wasn't an active hatred of the blacks. They were just kind of like Negroes are subhuman creatures. You're like, what the fuck? Where'd that come from? Because they thought everybody was subhuman. Like, and that was the weird thing is like, if you look at history from just an American perspective, you would be like, yeah, man, everybody's like fucking racist. But if you read what the British thought about the French, you know, like you'll see like the terms barbarian, the term savage, it applied to white people too. You know, they thought the Irish were savages. You know, they thought the Scottish were barbarians. They didn't give a shit. If you weren't what we are, you were some kind of lower life form. And that's how all of them thought, when especially when they had aristocrats in those societies writing the pages, writing the books. You know, those people were like, you go live amongst the French and they're garbage. You know, even their aristocrats are garbage. You're like, damn. You know, like, there's no love. That white supremacy bullshit, you know, the white congregation, that shit is fiction. Europe spent 500, 1,000 years killing each other. No, there was no white congregation that got together and thought, as long as we're white, everything's great. Like, no, they were killing each other, bro. The whites were killing each other on this continent while they had slaves. Both sides had slaves and they were killing each other on this continent. The French, the Spanish, the British, killing each other on this very continent. They burned the fucking White House down. Where was the white supremacy in that? When they marched on Washington and burned the fucking White House down, hey, you playing too rough. They weren't fucking playing. All right, these were very serious people. The blacks was like not on their agenda. The itinerary of stomping on the blacks when they weren't even concerned about that. They wanted to get rid of the fucking British. They wanted to get rid of the French. The Spanish get on my nerves. I want to get rid of them. You know, but it's impossible because they had a fucking empire. There's nothing you can do. And then also, it was not just that, but it was also Catholicism and Protestants. There's a whole lot of stuff. Fucking Muslims, all kind of stuff going on in the world, man. You can't. This is part of the way we view the world is problematic because it completely ignores hundreds of thousands of years of human history. You know, the idea that the Ottomans occupied Europe for years, colonized parts of Italy. This stuff was the Ottomans, the Arabs colonized parts of Africa, Morocco, and all this sort of stuff. Like, come on, man. Like, the world is bigger than blacks and whites. If your world, it's like there's 5 billion fucking Chinese people, and your history doesn't take into account 5 billion Chinese people. There's like 10 billion Indians, and your worldview doesn't take into account 10 billion Indians. How could you have a worldview that misses almost 20 billion fucking people? That's just between two countries. Your worldview sucks if that's what you came up to. Global white supremacy. Ooh. And somehow China never the most China was in, I think they were invaded, so was Japan. But they spent more time killing each other than the Europeans spent killing either one of them. The Japanese spent a whole lot of time killing themselves, killing each other. The Chinese warred forever before they made one country. The Warring States period in China was bad. Bad. They did all kind of damage to each other over there. But why do I need to know Chinese history? I don't know that much about it. I know enough. I know they was over there killing each other a whole lot. And they was killing each other as much as the Europeans were killing each other. And the Africans were killing each other too. The only difference is somebody got real good at killing each other. And they got so good to start killing other people too. As fucking Europeans. They got boats. And all of a sudden they start, we're gonna kill some exotic people now. You know, we're gonna kill some funny looking people now. But most people weren't even all that interested in going that far away. You know, they were so busy killing people who were like right here next to them. They never really thought to go over there and kill a bunch of people over there. They didn't really consider it. You know, that's kind of how China was. They were so busy trying to every small chieftain, leader of whatever tribe is trying to invade and take over these people's territory. They're not considering that there's entire empires on the other side of the fucking world that will crush them under their boot without question, with no problem. They're not even thinking about that, you know, because you're so busy trying to murder these people right here. And that's how Africans were. They was incredibly short-sighted. They were trying to kill each other, and then all of a sudden the white man shows up with guns. Like, oh shit, gunpowder. What's that? Never seen that before. You mean I can kill a motherfucker from right here and not have to move? Just, you know, like point this thing and shoot at him? Okay, I'll take it. You want what? These people that I'm using to scrub clothes? Okay, take them. I don't care. Give me more of them fire sticks. WWE wants to do a pay-per-view in China, apparently. Well, we'll see when it happens. It said Hong Kong, which I don't consider a part of China. I'm not a Chinese supremacy guy. I don't recognize Taiwan as part of China. I don't recognize Hong Kong as part of China, even though I know they took Hong Kong a couple of years ago. But Hong Kong is basically like a free enterprise zone. It's not really like China proper. It's not a British territory anymore, though. I'm pretty sure it's not. Sir John Legion says there were a recorded 200 Asians that fought in the U.S. Civil War. Some rank as high as captains, I believe. Yet, what's the narrative of their role in the Civil War because they fought on both sides? Indians also fought on both sides. And so did the blacks. See, this is what happens when you don't dabble in real history. And the weird thing is, the British were going to help the Confederacy. They considered it. Even though the British had already abolished slavery, they considered helping the Confederacy. They realized that the Confederacy needed their money. They needed them to buy cotton. And they turned it off. They got rid of the cotton, and the Confederacy ran out of money, and they lost. That's just kind of how it happened. But they considered helping them. They even considered getting involved. Just like the French did a run in during the Revolutionary War. We probably would not have won that war if it wasn't for the French. They hit the British with a steel chair. They pulled a Vegeta during the Cell games. They helped out a little bit. That's the thing about history, man. It's far more interesting if you actually learn the real shit. You know, we've always given the French some credit about what they did, but we bailed them out during World War II, so we're square on that. Okay, when France got colonized, we helped them out, so we're square. Now we've been paying their fucking military bills ever since. They need to get the fuck on. Yeah, World War II was touchy. I'm very glad they didn't do that ground fighting in Japan. No, that would have been nasty. That'd have been Vietnam before Vietnam. That would have been nasty. I don't want no part of that. Especially when you consider that Sir John Legion says, I heard somewhere that the British Crown was bankrolling the Ku Klux Klan during Reconstruction. I don't believe that because the Klan, a lot of the Klansmen were nationalists. I don't think they would have taken money from the British. I'm not sure. Unless somebody got some proof of that, I would be interested. But the Klan was basically like super Americans. Phenomenal A says Hitler had a whole plan set up for the U.S. once he took over that mapped out how he was going to take away the babies and wives or some shit like that. Well, that's just basically that's how you conquer people is you take the women, take control of the schools and the children and stuff. One of the main reasons why Hitler lost was because he didn't listen to his generals and how he was going to reach the states and such. I don't think he would have. I don't think he would have had much of a chance anyway. He just got bombed. Like the weird thing is, he spent so much time fighting them fucking communists, which was great. You know, that was amazing. But so the Russians did do something that was very helpful to us. And plus, he had overextended his military because he had invaded so many other territories, and he was also focused on killing a bunch of Jews. So there was a whole lot going on in Germany. So he was a little, and then they were trying to kill him. So I mean, there was like what a dozen attempts on his life. Obviously, the most famous one being the one they made a movie about Valkyrie. He tried to blow up his he tried to blow his ass up, but they tried to kill Hitler so many goddamn times. Like he got paranoid. They wasn't gonna listen to them. For what? The generals were the ones trying to kill him. The coup d'état. They want to take over, kick his ass out. WG Phil says they just wanted a receipt for the 100 Years' War and the French and Indian War. Yeah, the French are something else, man. That was back when the French used to be badass. They're not that today. They're terrible today. It shits. The French have been bad for many, many years. But back when they, during the, around Napoleon up until about 1942 or something like that, they were pretty cool. They weren't to be fucked with. He was going neck and neck with the British all the time. And out of nowhere, it just got soft. I think socialism really took them out. It was bad. I think it's all their women getting. I think the country getting cucked with all their women getting caught banging the Germans was kind of like a mistake. Did them all very, very bad. Did them all quite dirty, very dirty. All right, y'all. Almost 3 hours. Jesus Christ. It was Ali Frazier when it came to France and Germany. People don't realize how many human lives were lost in these world wars, man. A whole lot of human lives were lost. And it actually could have been more. It probably could have been more. As I was saying before I got cut off, if they'd have invaded Japan, oh my God, bro. That shit would have been Vietnam before Vietnam. Hirohito was basically God. All right. If they would have invaded Japan, they would have been fighting that fucking war in like the 1950s. It was going to be that bad. It was going to go real bad if they went into Japan. That was not going to be good. So the bomb actually helped. And I hate to say that because it sounds nasty, but when you have to realize the control Hirohito had over that society. He was the emperor, and they worshipped him like God. It would be like if we was to invade North Korea right now. All right, that's how bad it was. That's why overwhelming force forced him to surrender. It freed the Japanese people. That's why they're not so angry about it, because a lot of those people realized he was ordering men to their death. He was preparing to arm children. If they would have invaded Japan, it would have been Vietnam. That's exactly what it was going to be. Except the leader of the country is basically a cult leader. It would have been one of the worst things, and it probably wouldn't be in Japan today if that would have happened. They'd have had to kill everybody. It was going to be terrible. It was not a normal society. Imperial Japan was fucked. Making the emperor surrender was the only way to break Japan. That was it. That probably saved so many people. Because once he showed ass and he quit, his society almost fucking collapsed. They tried to prevent him from surrendering. That's how bad it was. Okay? He tried to prevent him from surrendering. Like, nah, man. It is. I'm very glad they dropped them bombs. After I learned about Imperial Japan and the kind of control, and it was because they had a socialist society. They took care of people from the cradle to the grave, and they felt loyal to him. They got free shit from the cradle to the grave. I think it's still that way today. But they don't have they have a royal family, but they're basically ceremonial. Much like the British have a royal family, but it's ceremonial. But back then, man, it was bad. It was bad. You said, wasn't Hideki Tojo the dictatorial things? Well, yes, but he was a general. We're talking about the guy who is the emperor of Japan. Right? He is. I think Tojo tried to kill him because he wanted to surrender. But it was bad. They were serious, and even the Japanese will admit it today that they would have fought to every baby, everybody. They would have fought to the death. They'd have had to ethnically cleanse Japan. That was the mandate, and they were serious about it. This was a society where suicide was a part of their culture already. Harakiri, when you stab yourself, the samurai culture, when you stab yourself in the stomach and rip your own guts out, that was already a part of their culture. So flying your airplane into a ship or something like that was nothing. It was expected. So when you start hearing about kamikazes, like people was like, that's crazy. Not if you understand Japanese culture. It ain't crazy. If you understand Islam, it's not crazy. Okay. You think it's crazy because you wouldn't do it. But these people believe it. So it's not crazy to them. It's their duty to give your life for the emperor. What greater honor could you do? You turn yourself into a martyr. Absolutely, I'd do it. And they did. They flew planes into all kinds of shit. This is where you got the idea for 9/11. They got it from fucking Imperial Japan with the kamikaze stuff. They'd have killed all kinds of people, bro. I can't imagine what they would have done and what they would have get away with if they really would have put some thought into it. With those kamikaze missions, man, that shit would have been bad. I'm very glad they bombed Japan. They suck. They fucking suck. Do you think FDR would have had a fifth term? The war would have gotten. I think he's going to die anyway. That's the weird thing about. I think quite a few of those leaders from World War II, except Stalin, and I think Churchill, they didn't die right after the war, but FDR died almost immediately. Him and Hitler, they checked the fuck out. Well, Hitler killed himself clearly, but FDR was already old and sickly and all that. He's probably gonna die anyway. I don't think he probably would have got a fifth term, but he probably would have died in office. Probably would have died in office anyway. He said we wouldn't have gotten Dragon Ball. He wouldn't have gotten New Japan. We wouldn't have gotten anything cool out of Japan. And I think they really learned a lot from that. Like, that's an interesting society because they have no ill will whatsoever for those bombs. The only thing they did is create a fucking Godzilla. That's what happened. We bombed Japan. They didn't ask for reparations. They didn't tell us to rebuild anything. They made fucking Godzilla. That's it. They took that shit and turned it into a franchise about a fucking irradiated giant dinosaur, you know? Like, that was it. That's interesting. There's some interesting shit. You see countries complain forever about losing a war. Japan don't. They don't give a shit. They still talk about the war too. They don't give a fuck about losing. It is what it is. Right. They're bad. He said people don't talk about the torture they had on the Japanese in the US who were citizens. Yeah, that's why they got reparations. And that's the conversation that when people talk about what's going on, why did the Japanese get reparations? Like, bro, do you know what they did to them? They did it to the Germans and the Italians too, by the way. But only new immigrants. Like, they didn't do like regular Sicilians or whatever. They didn't just go snatch them up and throw them in an internment camp because there were so many Italians in the United States by that time. Like, almost all of fucking New York was Italians, and people in Louisiana had a bunch of Italians, and they had been all over the country at this point. And they was doing mob shit, so they were really strong at the time. But they was getting those new Italians coming right off the boat and just assuming that these people are spies or terrorists and everything and locking them up. And that's why the Japanese got reparations. But we also started doing weird shit too, like taking people in. They started doing that around World War II. They started if you bomb an area, they started taking the people in. I think there was a bunch of Vietnamese people that came in, Koreans. We went into Korea. We started fucking around in the Middle East. All of a sudden, there's a bunch of fucking Muslims and Arabs and stuff in the United States. It's just weird. It's weird stuff, man. The people romanticize those decades like it was all gloomy. I mean, it wasn't. It was bad. World War II was fucking. That shit fucking sucked. But those years of like infinite wars, no, that was not good. Nah, from like 1939 to like 1970. No, not even 70. Maybe 1980. We were pretty in consistent wars at the time. You know, we jumped into World War II and we was in there for a while, and then we started the Cold War with the Russians, and now we ended up in Vietnam, then we ended up in Korea, and then there was sending to the boys to Cambodia, and it was just stuff everywhere. It was just shit popping up everywhere. People were just sending American troops out there, and that gave rise to the third worldism, third world socialists, communist movements like the Black Panthers and RAM and Symbionese Liberation Army and all these fucking groups. It's not good. You said Ella Fitzgerald she has a great voice. I really don't like her songs, but I love her voice. And I like Frank Sinatra too. All right, it's time to wrap this thing up. 3 hours. Jeez, that's the longest Q&A ever. All right, I appreciate y'all, man. Y'all have a good weekend. I'll probably talk to you guys again either on Saturday or Sunday. Peace out.